Yeah, we're off. Hi, guys. No, that's too much. Cat, move. Hop off for a sec.
Pain can suddenly disrupt life. At times like these, reach for Voltaren Enamel Gel from Chemist Warehouse. It relieves muscle pain 2 times faster and reduces inflammation. Voltaren Enamel Gel 180 grams is $25.99. Live with Full Health at Chemist Warehouse.
What matters to us most is around flexibility and choice. So just having a good financial.
And hey, Diane, good to see you.
Some of my fans were post.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Awakening Report. I have a special guest on. We're going to talk about some ancient technology that seems to be talking about maybe quantum physics. Could it be fallen angels, ancient aliens? I don't know. We'll have to figure that out. But I am excited to bring on Johann Ratz. He is going to talk about some amazing discoveries that he has made. So Johann, thank you for being on the show, and I appreciate you bringing these very timely and pretty fresh discoveries. So, kind of tell us what you discovered.
Well, I discovered the physics half of it, but the connection with the esotericism stuff was. This was just showed up a couple of years ago. I was having this kind of depressive funk, and some of my fans were posting this link to this book in my Facebook group, Idealism and Science versus Atheism. It was being passed around among multiple friends actually, and I just kind of like pushed it off because I was dealing with other things then. However, I got around to seeing it, and it turns out that. But another friend of mine, Kyle Allender, started making a series on him because he's another quantum idealist guy, and he started making a series on this, and so I looked into it. And anyway, what it turns out is that there is an occult science which supposedly comes from ancient Egypt called Hermeticism, and apparently this occult science has, according to this book, and they present some pretty interesting evidence which I'll lay out. I'm gonna be kind of careful to like draw conclusions about this because the conclusion is pretty far out, but they raise some very interesting parallels between modern physics and Hermeticism. And I applaud this. I'm like, at first I thought this is crazy, but then I look at them like, this is actually interesting. Not to say that it's true, but that there were parallels to talk about that were, they got me curious, as it were. It was like one of those, like say you're watching some mystery show on the paranormal and whatnot, and 99% of the time or 90% of the time it's baloney, but every like 10% of the time you bring up some little details that like kind of stick out and you're like, whoa, what is that? Right. Well, this whole book is whoa, what is that?
Wow. Well, take us deeper. I'm really curious to hear.
Good to see you.
The Quantum Hermetica is from 2018, published by Olivia and Ethan Palmer, and basically what there was this text on Hermeticism released by the Masonic Lodge of Chicago in 1908 called the Kabbalion, okay? And they go through 7 principles of Hermeticism in like a chapter on each, as well as some other chapters on related topics. And it turns out that, according to this book, and they do a pretty good job documenting each step along the way, the entire book is documenting parallels. By the way, this is on Amazon if anyone's interested. I'm sure Doug can provide a link when we're done here. They all have direct parallels to physics, very advanced physics, and some of the physics was not, actually, all of the physics essentially was not yet discovered at the time when the Kabbalion was written. And so in some cases they had to wait, for example, the chapter on vibration, we'll get to this maybe a little bit, was very clearly talking about wave functions or probability functions. And that wasn't yet discovered for another 18 years in 1926 when they discovered the Schrödinger equation. And they also described something that sounds uncannily similar to quantum entanglement, as well as believe it or not, much more advanced stuff, such as stuff that you could basically get from emergent space-time physics. In
Wow.
other words, yeah,
So wait, so the
So
ancient Egyptians were kind of onto this stuff? I mean, that's pretty amazing.
yeah, it was strange. Yeah. The thing with it was, I mean, you think about the ancient Egyptians, they were very advanced, and they actually talk about this in the book. At the last chapter, they talk about, there's this enigma of, you see this very sort of out of place artifact, right? They're describing. I mean, granted, this is the Mason saying that it came from the ancient Egyptians, and the problem is the Kabbalion was written pseudonymously.
Oh, that's right, Han. You had your root canal this morning. I'm glad it went well.
There were some people.
If they give you enough anesthetic, it goes pretty okay anyway.
Well, we have some ideas as to who wrote it, but no one really knows for certain. But they're claiming it comes.
This is going to, of course, raise a lot of questions for people, because this is a source that many would
First link of the day.
Absolutely, untrustworthy. So
that is correct.
Why would we give any credence to this?
The issue is not that, by itself you would want to say, okay, well, why trust the Freemasons? I mean, that isn't some kind of creepy cabal that's trying to, take over the world with the deep state or something like that, right? Well, that may be true, but the thing with it is that there are these parallels between this text and the modern physics. And that by itself raises eyebrows. It's like, well,
Diane, that link just more pestilence. It says that in the last days there'll be a lot of pestilence.
Okay, maybe they were not.
Oh, your nose was numb.
Mystical ideas or whatnot, and therefore they're, you can't trust that. But the point is that what was being described in this text turns out to also describe in very precise detail physics that we're just discovering right now.
Okay. Wow.
And so now you're starting to wonder, well, wait a minute, where did they get this from?
Right.
Because this is, it's independent corroboration. You might want to trust them, but you can trust the physics because that's, independently verified. And that in turn is corroborating, there is this objective parallel that is existing.
Yeah, with a death rate of 80%, apparently.
Whether or not the original source is trustworthy. And that by itself it raises eyebrows and makes one curious as to what's going on.
Right. And so when is this Masonic book, when was it written?
1908.
1908. Wow, that is just at the cusp there of some of the quantum physics discoveries.
Well, actually, that's the thing. I mean, the very early stuff, but the quantum physics discoveries that, the ones they describe, and there's some that are more advanced, like when they talk about the principle of mentalism, it's basically idealism, but they're describing it, you can describe that in a physics language, and I've done that completely independently on my channel, and it seems that after the authors might have actually picked it up from me in some respects, because it's some of the same kind of, they're talking about Hoffman's conscious realism and space-time emerging integrated information theory, which it all gotten pretty popular by the time this book came out, a couple years before that. Wow. But yeah, there were some things here, like they talk about the principle of vibration, which is the third hermetic principle.
Hey, Carly, good to see you.
Let me find where that was. It's in, I think, chapter 5 of the book, the Quantum Hermetica book.
I thought you gave that link, Di.
But anyway, okay, so let me read this paragraph just to give you a clue.
Go for it.
What is interesting to note about the cases given in this chapter is the fact that the teachings on vibration include direct parallels with physics discovered only after the fact. Remember, this is 1908 that was first written. This includes the general discovery of quantum mechanics and its associated quantum vibrations with the Schrödinger equation in 1926, the non-local nature of those vibrations in 1935, the zero vibratory rate of the universal wave function in 1967, the discovery of space-time as a network of entanglement with which matter is also unified, that's 2004 and 2015, and the mental nature of those vibrations in 2015, that's quantum cognition. The Kabbalion, by contrast, was written decades, and in some cases a full century before in 1908. So, isn't that strange? Like they knew this. I mean, this is, some of this is literally cutting edge physics. The discovery of space-time emerging from quantum entanglement. It directly comes out. This was actually officially verified last year. Like they called the DS. They had a pretty good hunch that it was the case from the ER equals EPR correspondence and the ADS mirror correspondence. Last year, they came out with something called the Diaz mirror correspondence and showed that space-time actually emerges, our space-time, not just anti-de Sitter space or ADS is spaces where what close to our space, but de Sitter space is our space, our kind of space-time. And they showed that de Sitter space emerges from quantum entanglement.
So kind of unpack that for people, because a lot of people don't know what you're
Okay,
referring
so quantum entanglement is this idea is basically when you have two particles that share the same wave function. A wave function is a quantum probability wave, which if anyone's out there is filling a double slit experiment, they have this situation where you shoot a single electron through a pair of slits, or this apparatus with a pair of slits, so the screen in the back.
Hey Trey, it's good to see you.
One through at a time, and it will start to form an interference pattern, despite the fact that it has something to interfere with.
Right.
And it's probabilistic, and what the conclusion was, and they've
Oh,
done many
man,
experiments
that's
after
not
this to
what I
kind of
wrote.
confirm this is what's going on, is that the particle is actually in multiple places at once distributed in a probability wave. It's not in one location in space, it's in multiple places in space.
Right.
And that's called a quantum probability wave. Now, as it turns out, you can put two or more particles into the same quantum probability wave at the same time, and when you do that, they're called quantum entangled. And so when you have two particles and you separate them that are entangled, you separate them at a vast distance, and you observe one, and that fixes the state of one. And instantaneously, the wave function collapses for that same quantum state, thousands of miles away or thousands of light years away, right then. And then the other particle will take on the exact opposite property, or the complementary property of the first particle that was collapsed. So there's this instantaneous correlation that, there's nothing connecting the two. There's no
Over the distance of light years, he said. One entanglement, another light years away, and when one goes off, the other goes off in sympathy in a different way. Wow, that's pretty deep.
There's no signal being passed between them.
Mm-hmm.
They're not like just being, pre-correlated or anything. There's just this instantaneous connection that's not going through space or time.
Right.
Yeah, that's
this is what Einstein
that was
calls
one.
spooky action at a distance,
Correct.
right? That he wrote in the EPR paper, right?
In 1935. That's when
right.
this came out in 1935.
And that's what's so amazing is that he was trying to disprove some of the conclusions
this
of quantum
if
physics.
this existed in reality, it would be ridiculous. Yeah, it would be ridiculous, but it's real anyway. And now we have technology based on it. They use the.
And think about it, they invented it in Boston. So if it gets released, Boston's going to be ground zero for this new strain of COVID. Wow, that's heavy.
So Einstein, EPR, Einstein, Podolsky, and Rosen were actually incorrect, even though they found this amazing thing suggesting this couldn't be, but that in reality, that's what it actually was, right?
Yeah, and not only that, but now they discovered with quantum gravity that space-time itself at a very deep level is an illusion. And it's not just an illusion, but the thing that undergirds that illusion is quantum entanglement. Quantum entanglement, there are quantum computations occurring in quantum entanglement, and quantum entanglement is not actually operating in space-time, because if it was, it would violate relativity. But it's going underneath space-time in some sense. And what turns out is that what we call space-time, physical space-time, is actually a construction that emerges in quantum entanglement. Wow. So not only is the spooky action that distance exists, but it's actually the fundamental thing, and the thing that we think of as normal, the space-time we think is normal, that has that's actually a construction from within this bizarre, spooky entanglement thing.
No, I just love this stuff. I mean,
yeah,
when you start comparing it with Genesis, that everything came out of the mind of God, right? That's what Planck was saying, and many others are saying. It's all a mental construction, right? We can't ignore this anymore. It's such a stuff.
And that's the thing. Hermeticism talks a lot about it being a mental construction.
Okay.
And it has, but it's interesting because it ties in the physics angle to it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't tie. It doesn't call it physics. It just says it is the way it is. But then after the fact, this book comes along. I find this book that Cal Allender is making videos on, and I look at this and I'm like, whoa, this is these are actually parallels with modern physics.
Wow. I love this stuff. It is so mind-blowing.
Louis Diane, that's interesting. I didn't know that.
So both Niels Bohr, Max Planck, Einstein, they're all talking about how really there is no matter as such, right? Just everything is small little vibrations of energy. Right? And that begs the question, where did this energy come from? I mean, my answer would be it all comes from God. Right. So we definitely have God on this side, but we also have, you know, there's a whole host of malevolent beings who have decided to rebel against God. And they did some things that weren't so kosher.
It's interesting you bring this up because now, and it's interesting because the book itself says not to do this. Like it actually has a warning in the book itself, don't play with this stuff.
Okay.
But there are certain, this was actually kind of spooky. They talk about the use of the pentagram in here. And apparently this has a connection to physics as well, something called causal dynamical triangulation.
No way.
And it turns out, you know, when you're doing middle school geometry, right, you're asked to construct a space, right? You start with a point for a single, you know, point, right? Zero dimensional space. To make a, you know, a one-dimensional space, you need a second point, you draw a line, right? And you draw a plane that needs 3 points and so on and so forth, right? Well, causal dynamical triangulation is trying to triangulate space-time, okay?
Well, okay.
Right.
And so it needs 4 points, or actually, you need 5 points because you have, you know, 3 for 2 dimensions and so on. You need 5 points. And I don't know what the reason is for it, but apparently this it produces a, to get a space-time, to triangulate a space-time, you need a 4-dimensional object called a pentachoron, okay? It's a tetrahedron in 4 dimensions.
Okay.
And for whatever reason, this tetrahedron, this pentachoron has to be projected down into 2 dimensions. I think it may have something to do with holography. I'm not certain of the exact details of the physics, but it is mentioned in the book.
Okay.
And they have citations on all of this. So if you're saying like, well, this could be a quack book, I mean, I was thinking that at first too, because I mean, the subject is kind of quacky. It's not. I mean, it sounds kind of quacky, but the actual
hasn't the Pope bought? I'm not sure if this is right. I don't know where I got it from, but the Pope set up like a big acreage and one of them is the Jews. They got a building for themselves. On the opposite of that, the Muslims, they got a building for themselves, and you got the Christians. Oh, that makes a triangle. And you got the Christians, they got a building as well, and it's shaped in a triangle. So that's the one world religion they're bringing it in. Wow.
It really did their homework. They've got like 7 pages worth of citations on this, and it's all hard physics.
Well,
yeah. And so basically, it produces this 2-dimensional projection of this. And when you do that, you project this 2-dimensional pentagon in 2 dimensions. What happens? You get a pentagram. And it turns out that in causal,
yeah, she brings all the good info, doesn't she, Talia?
dynamical triangulations, this is how space-time emerges, and not only that, but the contents of space-time emerge. And so you're causing stuff from the quantum information underneath space-time, which in a different, in kind of a more classical way of thinking about it, you could think of that as a supernatural realm, right? It's, you know, classically thought of the natural world as those things which exist in space-time, right?
Okay.
I mean, they're not treating it as such, they're treating it all as a science, a very elaborate science. But, you know, traditionally you think, well, everything, you're not knowing any better, you think, well, everything in space-time is, if you didn't know you live in the Matrix or whatnot, or in an emergent space-time universe, everything inside space-time is physical reality, everything outside of space-time, you know, because everyone associates the physical with the material. If it's not in space-time, it's not material, which then people think, well, that makes it supernatural. Certain sense, yes, but in a different sense, well, no, there's a physics to that as well.
Do you think, you know, sometimes I think that we're all on the same basic continuum, right? You have, like, when we talk about light, we talk about a electromagnetic spectrum, right? And there's some things that we can actually see and some things we can't. I kind of get the feeling that going from the spiritual realm until to ours, that we're all sort of on the same continuum. It's just that there's some things that we can't see because it's just a different type of physics. It's still a physics of sorts, but it's
you can't see outside space-time because your visual, you know, all your sensory data comes from the space-time universe. So
right.
You can infer things because what's going on outside space-time has an effect on what's going on in the universe you can see, and so you can still experiment it and so on.
Right. Wow.
Yeah, Diane, you post a lot of stuff and it's from different sources. So you must do a lot of looking. You must enjoy doing it. We enjoy getting your links. Don't worry about that. Yeah, but a lot of hard work, I bet.
Yeah, so they're basically caught.
Because you would have read a lot of stuff that was crap as well. So You had to read it before you found out it was crap, though. So yeah.
Causing things that are outside, in this supernatural realm, to emerge to inside space-time with these two-dimensional kind of quantum projections, which, I mean, it sounds kind of.
It sounds kind of freaky, right?
It sounds freaky. It sounds.
You know, anytime you mention the word pentagram,
yeah,
major red flags go up. Like, oh my goodness, this is really
scary. And they said in the book, don't play with this, but they brought the connection up, the parallel. You're like, well, what is that thing?
Well, because it sounds like this is what they're talking about, maybe opening portals and stuff. I mean, this makes me think of, I forget the guy from D-Wave Systems that talks about, you know, the quantum computer, and it's like it's like you're listening to a beast. I'm forgetting his name, but you know, he's talking about opening portals, using quantum computers to open portals and to go in and to reach in and grab their resources, whatever they may be. It's yeah.
It probably has a bit of a misunderstanding of how a quantum computer works, but I mean, I think I kind of understand what he's getting at. It's they like to think of, you know, the things in the states in the superposition as being in parallel universes, and so you're using simultaneously all the resources across the multiverse, supposedly. So
supposedly, right? Who knows?
Which it may be the case. I mean, it doesn't mean it's mutually exclusive, but
sure.
I don't think there's anything intrinsically occult going on with the D-Wave or anything.
I agree with you. I'm not suggesting that quantum computers are, you know, occultish or anything like that. However,
same underlying physics being.
Well, yeah, and I happen to wonder if maybe using those, we will be able to open up portals. That, you know, I mean, I don't know. It's only just speculation.
Yeah, well, then that was the suggestion with the pentagram, that it was essentially opening a kind of portal.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what's interesting, you brought up quantum computation. That was another interesting thing.
Well, you've only got 10 days to watch that. I didn't know that.
So maybe what I should do is first look at the issue of vibration, and then we're going to go back to
Diane, spoiler alert. I think Dr. Fauci's the villain.
Well, there's an issue that's really, because when you're talking about these vibrations, they're talking about it's a reference to probability waves, and when you talk about probability waves, you can then start to talk about quantum information and quantum computation, right? So let me I keep getting lost in this thing. It's not that big of a book. It's actually pretty short. I would really recommend it because it's a fascinating little book. If anyone wants to buy it, it's like $15 on Amazon. But
wow. And say the name of it again.
The Quantum Hermetica.
Oh, okay, Quantum Hermetica. Okay. Wow.
I can send you a link afterward, Doug, if you want.
Yeah, absolutely. This is interesting stuff.
Yeah.
And again, just for my audience out there, you know, this is pretty weird stuff. Right? There's no question about it. But quantum physics is pretty weird too. Okay, you know, Niels Bohr said that if you don't feel dizzy after, you know, thinking about quantum physics, you haven't really understood it. So, you know, this is weird stuff. The question is, how did the ancients get this knowledge, right? And that is where there could be some, you know, some delivery by malevolent beings that maybe weren't supposed to reveal.
They actually talk about that in the last chapter, and they go through another way.
Diane, it's not on YouTube. I can't do it. It's not on YouTube. And it'd be a bit risky anyway to go against public standards if I'd done a Dr. Fauci expose.
Hypotheses, and they start with the mystical hypothesis, which is just that this was kind of acquired by sort of mystical insights, and that makes sense with, you know, mentalism or vibration, or, you know, mentalism or correspondence, because I mean, after all, you could have, you know, say some Hindu person is thinking of the world is like this big illusion in Brahma or whatever, you know, Brahman or whatnot, right? And so, okay, well, that's just, you know, they might have just happened upon that because of sort of mystical thing, but then they can point out that doesn't explain the direct physics of connections, right? Like, why would you be connecting vibrations with that kind of thing, right? It's kind of set up, and then these vibrations have to correlate to physics exactly. And then they suggest, well, ancient Egypt. I mean, that's where the Masonic text says it comes from. Mm-hmm. And well, then the problem is well, you know, the Egyptians had a lot of, you know, advanced knowledge, right? You know, definitely, like, you know, see, building the pyramids, there was a lot of mathematics and engineering that went into that. But the issue with that is that even then, you would still have other pieces of knowledge that you would expect to come along with that kind of knowledge, like quantum mechanics, right? I mean, how do you get to quantum mechanics if you're not able to do the experiments that generate quantum mechanics that need electricity? And if you have electricity, you're probably going to be researching other things as well, such as chemistry or genetics and so on, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the question is, well, this really doesn't seem to fit ancient Egypt. It's like a relic from somewhere, you know?
Right.
And then they get into the issue of, well, if it's a relic, you know, it doesn't fit into our world any more than it fits into the ancient Egyptian world. Even though the ancient Egyptians were advanced, it does not fit into their world. It's this sort of out of place artifact. It's just like, well, where did this come from? It speaks to something coming from somewhere else. And then they actually get into some very interesting stuff about what historians have to say about this. And there was the Egyptian historian Manetho at the time, okay? And this is probably the equivalent of Herodotus, the Egyptian Herodotus. I mean, insofar as you can have a reliable historian of antiquity, someone like Manetho would be as close as you could get to that. I mean, he's not just making stuff up. It's not mythology. This is I mean, he's not up to modern standards of historians, but he is, for his time, an accredited historian. And so he's as reliable a source as you can get when it comes to the ancient world, of taking them at their own word.
Yeah.
So in his writings, the Egyptian historian Manetho indicates that their origins were in the antediluvian world, which is before the flood. And then he says, in quotes, he said, after the Great Flood, the hieroglyphic text written by Thoth is, of course, the ancient Egyptian god of magic, identical to Hermes of the Greeks and Mercury of the Romans, were translated from the sacred language into Greek and deposited in books in the sanctuaries of Egyptian temples. It is interesting to note that he dates their origins as being 9,000 years old, given that Manetho lived in the 3rd century BC. This would place the date of the Great Flood at around 9300 BC, if we were to stick to Manetho's chronology. This interestingly also corresponds to the date Plato gives for a cataclysmic flood. Given the global distribution of a great deluge of an antediluvian world, it is unlikely that these stories are not based on actual events. And then, of course, it goes on to point out that at that same point in time, you have places like Göbekli Tepe coming across, which that was like 9500 BC, which it came.
Oh, that's a good idea, Diane. A fake email.
And there was this event, called, and this is in the book, but I do recall this elsewhere, Meltwater Pulse 1b, which happened in 9500 BC. And it was basically the event that it was the end of the last ice age. It was this big cataclysm where basically the ice caps melted down all of a sudden, and there was this they call it the Younger Dryas catastrophe, basically, and it raised sea levels like 200 feet around the world or something like that, like all at once.
Wow.
Wow.
So, okay, let's stop right there for a second, because if this information came from the antediluvian world, that's huge. That would suggest that the antediluvians had knowledge of quantum physics, right?
Yes.
I mean, that's pretty incredible stuff, right?
I don't want to draw that conclusion, but like that's what the book is saying, and it's.
I mean, and
it's one of those things where you don't want to say it's the case because it's seen as crazy, and yet these people are presenting evidence that says, well, what is this? It's really weird.
Yeah, and just put in perspective for people, quantum physics.
Yeah, Diane, prayers for your friend who's really sick. Hope they recover.
Physics is what gave us the microchip, which of course gave us cell phones and computers and all the electronics that we use today.
Lasers.
Lasers. Exactly. You
go
to
the grocery store.
That's exactly. I was just going to say that, right? So all of that stuff is based on quantum physics. So if we didn't have that, we wouldn't have any of this stuff. But if the antediluvians had knowledge of that, well, I don't know if they would have had checkout scanners in Walmart, but the world might have been quite a bit different than what we have been told it was all about. And they might have very different technology than we could even imagine.
Most cities do not exist like today. They exist very close to. If you look at the wild of them, I live near Milwaukee. Where do you live, Doug?
I'm in Denver.
Okay, that's in Colorado. It's pretty low, but okay. But Milwaukee is right on the shore of Lake Michigan, right? And a lot of cities are built on the coastfront. Well, what happens when the sea level rises 200 feet all of a sudden?
Yeah, well,
all the cities get, and now of course all that gets underwater.
Right.
that could decay really fast. You'd see little artifacts every once in a while that really, like what is that? Like that one fossilized spark plug or something they found somewhere. But like it's most of the stuff is, well, where did this come from? This is,
get off the
where did it go? Well, it's underwater, and they occasionally find ruins underwater, which is like off the coast of They found one off the coast of India some years back, and another one off the coast of Japan, one off the coast of Cuba actually. And so it's plausible that something like that could be. National Geographic had this special some years back where they pointed out, well, what happened if all the humans tomorrow were just to disappear for whatever reason? And they didn't even bring in a notion of a flood, but they just said, let's just say all the humans disappeared. What would happen with them?
Save 8 people. Right.
What?
Save 8 people.
Yeah, Talia, they're doing that nuclear drill right now, I think. It's already started.
Right.
Yeah, okay, or save no one, but they suggested, well, and they said after 2 days, 3 days.
My mate Greg got the COVID-19, and he was really sick for about 3 weeks, really sick.
The plumbing system would, basically everything would start flooding, and then the power would go out, and then they cycled through, and then after, several thousand years, most of the skyscrapers would be decayed, and then, very short time later, there'd be nothing left at all.
Wow.
I mean, not a very short time, but in geologic terms, like they were suggesting a couple million years, you hardly even notice that there was anything left.
Right.
And you'd just be like, you erased from history, basically, and 11,000 years ago is not that far back in the grand scheme of things, but at the same time, if it's underwater.
It's underwater. And I once listened to John Baumgartner, who developed a computer model of the flood. And according to his model, there were these huge whirlpools that were going around, like probably 6 of them, gigantic whirlpools going around, kind of like gigantic vacuum cleaners that were going around, or he could actually describe them as blenders. They were going around the Earth, the surface of the watery surface of the Earth at that point, kind of blending up everything at the bottom. So if his model is correct, then whatever was in that that pre-flood human technology could have been pulverized, essentially.
There was a guy named Bright Insight on YouTube, or is a guy on Bright Insight, and he had this video a while back about he was suggesting that there are ruins, like pre-flood, Pleistocene era ruins in the Sahara, especially like around Morocco and so on. And he then pointed out, like, if you look at, Western Sahara from a satellite, you see that there are very clearly, it looks like there's a floodplain. It looks like there was, water had washed across it from east to west at one point, and in a very rapid fashion. And if you do that, if something's sitting on there, and he was suggesting that there were ruins on that, and there may still be some ruins. I've actually heard stories that there are sometimes ruins that are discovered. Like there was some pyramids that were found. They were actually fairly comparable, fairly large in size, and they were either in southern Egypt or maybe Libya or whatnot. Okay. And no one knew they were there because they were covered in sand dunes. And you have this large vast desert. You think there's nothing there. Well, no. 11,500 years ago, that was actually there was no Sahara. 11,500 years ago, it was a big vast plain, probably with some forests and so on. It was grassy and green and maybe wet.
He says there was no Sahara back then, which is probably right. But I just wonder, where did all the sand come from then?
And now it's all dry, and you have sand dunes covering everything.
Where did they come from?
Some of that could be hidden, which would be kind of an interesting thing if some, adventuresome archaeologist.
Exactly.
Would be Indiana Jones 2 goes around and finds evidence of something like that in
that'd be amazing.
That would be amazing.
Yeah. There's probably all kinds of
The Sphinx in Egypt, that was buried up to its chest in sand when Napoleon showed up. When Napoleon showed up, it was up to its chest in sand. They had to dig it all out eventually. I don't know who done that, but it was under sand as well. So imagine what's under the sand in the Sahara Desert. That's what they're saying.
That are buried, and they're just right under our feet.
Perfect Hollywood movie, but
exactly. Yeah. Well, so back to this whole thing of this Hermetica. Basically, they're suggesting that there was ancient knowledge of quantum physics that probably got lost in the flood. We have some trace evidence of it. This book is presenting it and making the case that the ancients, not necessarily the Egyptians, but people before them actually had this ancient knowledge.
Yes, and it was, and Manetho actually says that it was passed on to the Egyptians before it was deposited in.
And they didn't know what to do with it, right? I mean, it's like if you drop the whole quantum physics manual in my lap, I probably wouldn't know what to do with it. Like,
yeah,
it's interesting, but I don't know how to employ this technology.
Yeah, I said, okay, according to the legend, the Emerald Tablet was said to, which is another Hermetic text, was said to be contained in the Pillars of Hermes, along with more than 300 scrolls. They were said to have been moved from there to Heliopolis by Alexander the Great, which is a very interesting question. Makes you wonder what was in the Library of Alexandria exactly.
Oh, I know. I wish we'd not lost that, but oh well.
It sucks.
It does. Wow. Okay. Wow. This is pretty crazy stuff.
Pretty fascinating.
Yeah, and actually, then they mentioned at the end, farther in, you'd still have. I mean, look at how much technology it took for us to develop our current state of physics, like technology and infrastructure. Like when you think about a civilization, you have to have a certain amount of. I mean, just a smart person alone is not going to figure this out by themselves if they're living in a cave and needing to hunt, saber-toothed tigers every day to stay alive, right? Or hunt mammoths and save off saber-toothed tigers every day to stay alive.
Sure.
You have to have an infrastructure to do this. You need to have, well, think about what it took to get electricity. You had to have experimenters playing with this stuff in laboratories, and then eventually people would, they had to be supported by a large agricultural system with a road network and so on. And then
the industrial revolution, really, you need the whole system.
Well, you think about some of the stuff required superstring theory, like some of the insights they had that were coming from vibration with atomic matter into it. And they had this one where they're talking about a spin net fluid, space-time being constructed from a spin net fluid of like entanglement, a spin net liquid rather. And they had different vibrations in this would produce W and Z particles, as well as various classes of subatomic particles, other subatomic particles. And they were basically able to unify space-time with matter doing this by saying you have this matter is this construction of this entanglement field. And then different vibrations in this, different excitations, I should say, in this field produce or result in the properties of these specific particles. And so, well, then they start hinting at this. Right? I mean, they don't mention the specific particle class or anything, but they very directly reach the same conclusions that space-time is, or that matter is basically. I mean, they call it the ether because it's 1908 and space-time was barely just known, so they're, using 19th century language to kind of describe this at the time. But, when you think about what an ether is in modern 21st century parlance, you think, well, that's replace that concept. I would call it space-time instead, right? And so when you translate the concept, you see, whoa, that's talking about, the discovery of matter being excitations in this, of space-time essentially, or excitations in the same field that gives rise to space-time, I should say.
How does this tie into the Higgs boson field?
The Higgs boson field will be another particle in there. That's the particle that gives all the other particles mass.
Okay.
So that would be another. Yeah, it doesn't tie in directly in a very explicit way. Only in that it is another particle that is, derived from this field. So.
Okay.
Diane, my friend Greg, he took about 2.5 months to come good. Actually, it took a long time for him to get back on his feet.
The way I understood the field is that it's analogous to water, and then any object within that is sort of displacing the water, and then it's moving within that field. But maybe I'm not water, but it's analogous to it. That's okay. Oh, all right.
Yeah. So this thing was okay. So the point they're making is, say you discover there is such a thing as a W or Z particle, you need to have, or a matter in general, such you could find a way, these particles generally, you could find a way to unify them with, space-time, like this 2004 and 2015 discovery of space-time, where a matter being unified with these spin net liquid that undergirds space-time, right? They call it spin net liquid. It's a physics term, and that's why it's called a liquid, but it basically is a large-scale entanglement field, where everything is entangled to everything else. They call it topological entanglement or topological ordering. So you think about the technology that was needed to do that. You had to have particle accelerators. Well, a particle accelerator. I mean, if you ever been, I mean, Fermilab. I've been to Fermilab once. It was, it's down in Chicago. It's not too far away from me. A couple hours away from me. Maybe an hour and a half, something like that.
Yeah, Talia, my friend, he was sick 2 or 3 weeks as well, but really sick. He could hardly talk.
But if you go there and you see this big particle accelerator, well, that's a lot of the amount of manpower and years of research and manufacturing ability to put into that would have been tremendous. I mean, you have to have parts coming from who knows where to put into that thing, and those parts need factories with workers behind them, with a large agricultural and industrial and road system, right?
Right.
Electric power. You need to have a pretty large scale infrastructure to be able to develop this kind of knowledge. You can't just get this knowledge out of nowhere. You have to have infrastructure, and then you can use that infrastructure to do the kind of high level experiments you need to do to actually get at this knowledge, right?
So let's stop right there for a second, because what we have today is based on, as you've been describing, years and years and years of manufacturing, industrial revolution, the right agricultural conditions, so that we can have knowledge increase incrementally.
Mm-hmm.
But according to the Book of Enoch, they said that these angels came down and they gave the knowledge to humanity, right?
Well,
so
okay, so
maybe could we have a shortcut, kind of jumpstart
that's the thing. So what they say is, what they point out here is that even still, you have to have this associated infrastructure to explain the development of this knowledge, right? I mean, there's one piece that comes from the Kabbalah that comes directly. You combine it with Hermeticism, and they point to this I'll get into this later. This is really fascinating. They compare it to an MIT document of a description of a Bloch sphere. A Bloch sphere is a particular Hilbert space representation of a qubit, for a bit in quantum computing. And there's a number of properties that are very explicitly referring to the Bloch sphere representation of a qubit, okay? And it turns out that this exact representation, they go through parallel by parallel on this, it shows up in an exact description of this in ancient Kabbalist text called the Sefer Yetzirah. It's describing a Bloch sphere with permutations and commutations, like superpositions of bits.
Wow.
Yeah, it's incredible.
That is mind blowing.
Yeah, and the way when you put it into the bigger context of Hermeticism, which we'll get into as well, when you combine them, you see that not only are they describing a Bloch sphere, they're describing it in the right context. They're describing it as being in this underneath space-time Hilbert space that wave functions exist in. Where's the qubit? And the qubit is inside of a wave function.
Mm-hmm.
Whoa, they even know where. I mean, they're describing it, but they're describing it. I mean, if it's just like one little detail over here, you could say, well, this is pareidolia. You're finding details in this that are. I mean, maybe the whole thing is very elaborate pareidolia, but it's interesting because at a certain point, the number of parallels start to add up to the point where it becomes statistically significant. It's not just seeing patterns. It's saying, well, if this is just seeing patterns, then the next detail we come along shouldn't fit the pattern.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it does fit the pattern, and it fits it precisely in the right kind of context you would expect to see if what's being described as a Bloch sphere. There's a description of quantum computation, or a qubit, and this ancient other.
And guys, notice mainstream media is not reporting the deaths of COVID anymore. There's still people dying, but they're just not worried about it now. They done their job.
Ancient text, which also fits into this system.
Oh.
Yeah, so what they're saying is that, you would still see evidence of such an infrastructure. I mean, they could be pretty advanced to have, if they had this knowledge back then. Once they have it, they could still, you'd have like, say, kind of a weird combination of old tech and high tech.
Right.
But if they were to develop this, you would still see the evidence of it. You might expect to see ancient satellites floating over, and we just don't see that. I mean, who knows what the Black Knight satellite is, but you would see evidence. You'd see someone have a fossilized cell phone somewhere, and you don't see that. You see some strange artifacts, but not at that caliber. And so what they're saying is that the infrastructure needed to develop this knowledge is not found anywhere on Earth like it should be.
So let's back up for a second, because according to Genesis 6, you had the sons of God coming down before the flood, right? And that seemed to be some kind of a regular occurrence, right? They were coming here, hanging out for a very significant amount of time, right? So if you have these incredibly advanced beings, we'll call them fallen angels, that are coming and they're sharing information, but they're also living here, however that looked, then I would imagine that you could probably go very quickly with a lot of this technology. And there may be different means of, acquiring this knowledge, of even implementing this knowledge. If they have advanced understanding of the universe, and if they
You
were
don't need
able
to
somehow
develop
to
it, you
unlock
can just get it
portals.
from their knowledge set,
Say that again.
You don't need to develop it yourself. You can just get it
Right.
from the knowledge set.
Right, and then they could actually help implement it in a way that might be far superior to our, slow growth.
Yeah, and so you have this really weird situation of low tech and high tech all combined into one. With well, where is the evidence of this? Well, it didn't have to be that developed infrastructure wise, because it's coming in prefab.
Yeah, exactly, right. It's already given to us. It's already, it's coming from this other realm. Call them ancient aliens, fallen angels, whatever people want to call them. I think they're fallen angels, but
the book actually has a description of this that we'll get into later, which is kind of interesting. It asks the question of exactly what a fallen angel is, and it reaches a conclusion that is a little bit uncomfortable to both a materialist academic as well as a normal religious person.
Okay.
They talk about this actually. It's not exactly. Let's just put it this way. A lot of people like to have an either or when they talk about it. They say, well, no, there are no angels. It's just aliens that ancient people misidentified as such. Well, no, there are no aliens. It's demons that are tricking us, right? Well, they're saying they have this third idea that, well, no, you add all the properties that you would call a fallen angel on one side. And the fallen angel, by the way, if you read Mike Heiser's stuff, is not the same thing as a demon. There's a distinction between them that we've kind of lost, in our modern context.
Yeah, I would disagree with that, but that's beside the point.
He has some pretty good. He has some. I've actually looked at his research. He has some pretty good case for this, based on the beliefs of the Hebrews at the time and what they were recording.
Wow.
So if you have on the one side this description of all the things you would call a fallen angel on the one side, and all the things you would call an alien on the other side, like just list them up as properties, what they're saying is that they would fit both categories at once, essentially.
Wow.
So in a way, it's everyone loses, but everyone wins, right? So it's
right. Well, it's interesting. A lot of the modern ufologists talk about this semi-materialized race of beings. David Jacobs talked about that. John Mack from Harvard, when they were talking to people that claimed to have been abducted by aliens or whatever, the aliens told them that they were a semi-materialized race, and they were trying to create some kind of a hybridized race so that they could fully integrate with us, right? Wow. So that's according to these abductees.
That is interesting, because there is something in this book. I'm trying to find it. I recall reading it somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a short enough book. It's less than 100. I mean, it's a little bit more when you add the references and the table of contents, but it's
right.
Basically less than 100 pages. Just under 100 pages. A little under, rather, like 90-ish or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And they describe. I remember the physics actually, because I remember reading it elsewhere. But firstly, you've heard of dark matter, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so you have this situation where you see stars are being pulled along by a gravitational force, but it seems to have no center. There's no mass that's actually like it's being pulled along by empty space. There's a mass that should be there that's pulling it, but you look there and there's no mass. And you see this effect all around. It is mapped across galaxies and actually maps very nicely in general to the overall structure of a galaxy. So you have, the mass concentration in the center of a galaxy is higher. Towards the edges, it's spiral galaxy, and towards the edges, it's thinner. Well, the dark matter is distributed in the same fashion. It's denser towards the middle. So you could say, like, you even have like a dark matter galaxy in a sense. It's almost like a shadow of our own galaxy of dark matter, right? And yeah, so what's the suggestion was by a guy named Verlinde, he was suggesting that what was going on was he was saying that there are these other degrees of freedom beneath in Hilbert space that are vibrational degrees of freedom, basically. And maybe I can find I know how to find this.
This is amazing stuff. Yeah.
Hold on, my lamp is. Something's wrong with my lamp. Sorry.
That's okay. That's all right.
All right. I kind of look ghosty now, don't I?
Spooky, a little spookier.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Described also in the third chapter. Okay. Oh wait, no. Okay, let's go. Two of them. Okay, here we go. So the suggestion was that you have these. Okay. These degrees of freedom are how. Okay. Now hold on here. Oh yes. According to Mond, the gravitational influence associated with dark matter actually derives from the vibrations of underlying degrees of freedom coming from beneath the emergent spacetime. These degrees of freedom are now how entropy is defined in physics, and modern theories of quantum gravity describe gravity as a result of quantum entropy.
Wow.
So basically, what happens is you adding the, it's not in our spacetime, but it's adding this extra information there, entropy, and so it's like a shadow gravity effect. You're having this influence into our space-time, even though it's not in our space-time, it's in this other universe.
Wow. We're just about out of time, but kind of just summarize some of your main points, because this has really been just mind-blowing.
Well, basically, you have very advanced physics discovered in a context. They did enough research to recover the entire system.
Yeah, Talia, sudden adult death syndrome is skyrocketing. And also, I think Diane might have posted this, or I read it. No, it wasn't in the Australian media. 75% of people autopsies have strange blood clots in them. I'm pretty sure Diane posted that.
The skeleton, the entire system of this book. And it describes ancient Egyptian occult science, but what's being described in detail, when you know what you're looking at, it's basically it's modern quantum gravity, emergent space-time physics combined with idealism. It's a quantum idealism framework, and they get into the details of the physics, and they describe things like, quantum entanglement here, emergent space-time from quantum entanglement. They have the Bloch sphere represent. Let me get to the Bloch sphere. I want to look at the Bloch sphere because that was an absolutely. Oh, basically, so what they were saying was that these other universes, these other vibrational planes. And it actually shows up in various other like Hindu texts that you describe.
Diane, most of the info I get on that stuff is through your links. So I really appreciate them.
These things is like lokas and such, right? They call them vibrational, planes. Well, the thing with it is they would have the same basic physics as our universe, which includes such things as central force laws. When you have a central force law, you automatically get back, things like gravity and, central force laws will produce, when you have enough mass, what happens when you put the mass together with gravity? There's enough mass, a very large amount of it. It's going to gravitate into a sphere, right?
Okay.
And you say that sphere and the mass is made of hydrogen gas or something. I mean, because it's, it's quantum physics, it's going to produce the same particles. Well, eventually it's dense enough to produce a fusion reaction. What happens with a self-contained a fusion reaction that is self-contained in its own gravity? What do you call that? Like a hydrogen bomb, but the hydrogen bomb is so heavy that its self-gravitation holds it together in a sphere.
Okay. Yeah.
That's a star, right?
Okay. Sure.
So what they're saying is wherever this other plane has such things as, stars and planets on it, and that's where these so-called, these fallen angels are coming from. They're just in a different frequency domain.
Okay.
Yeah, so like I said, it blurs the line.
Yeah. Well, and that's kind of what I was getting at. The whole electromagnetic spectrum. It's just a different frequency, right? They're on a different frequency than we are.
Yeah, it's like the same concept, but it's applied to quantum waves.
Right.
Okay. Here I found the description of the Bloch sphere. This is an absolutely fascinating parallel. Okay. In fact, one Kabbalist text, the Sefer Yetzirah, or Book of Creation, appears to provide a very good description of a 22-level Bloch sphere. It's not Bloch as in like a cube. It's named Felix Bloch, B-L-O-C-H, who came with the idea.
Yes. Okay.
These 22 letters, which is 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet, the foundations he arranges on a sphere with 231 modes of entrance. If the sphere be rotated forward, good is implied. If in retrograde motion, evil is intended. For intended for indeed showed the mode of combination of letters, each with each, aleph with all, and all with aleph. This is like, superposition, right? Combinations, permutations. Thus, in combining all together in pairs, are produced these 231 gates of knowledge. Describe something else weird. Okay, so the block sphere is a mathematical representation of the state of the space of a qubit. Here, states are arranged on the surface of a sphere in pairs with an axis for each pair of states. Pure states, meaning single states, are on the surface of the sphere, whereas mixed states or permutated combinations of the pure states are located within the sphere. This is the description of our modern physics now. Okay, each such permutation corresponds to a different superposition of states, which would process a different probable outcome within the quantum state. This again. What is seen in the description in the Sefer Yetzirah. This is again what is seen in the description in the Sefer Yetzirah. The 22 letters are arranged on the sphere, producing 231 permutations corresponding to entrances within the sphere. Remember, so the permutated states are within the sphere. The corresponding to entrances within the sphere.
Yeah.
The mixed states in the interior of the block sphere. In turn, the description of each of these 231 different gates of knowledge corresponds lastly to the different outcomes in information.
Yeah, Diane, but I didn't get the vax.
One would expect from different superposition of the qubit. Likewise, operations, this one is very interesting. Likewise, operations are done on the qubit through rotations of the block sphere. When different rotations correspond, rotations correspond to different outcomes.
I think it was like something like 90% of Australians took the vaccination. I think it was that high, which is really doesn't say much about our, yeah.
This appears to correlate with the example given of evil intent and good intent ultimately correspond to the different rotations of the sphere in the Sefer Yetzirah. With only one example, these peculiar similarities to quantum computing would seem to describe letters in superposition in Hilbert space. Given that the context of this passage is in describing the creation of the universe with these letters, this would seem to fit firstly with the general science described before behind Hermetic correspondence, as well as the synthesis of Hermeticism and Kabbalah described here.
Wow.
That's
that's incredible. Well, we are out of time. I want to thank you for coming on, and just a really.
By the way, they do mention the fallen angels at the end. Actually, they say the Book of Enoch, and they show these shows up on multiple mythologies. Like the Irish even called them like the Tuatha De Danann, and the Sumerians called them the Yigi, the Egyptians called them the Urshu.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's fascinating stuff. Well, everybody, thank you for tuning in. This has really been kind of wild stuff, but there's some pretty crazy things that happened.
Okay, you like this guy? His name Johann Ratz. He's got his own channel. I just sub now. I love anything on quantum physics and that. So I'm going to show Jeff Peck, and he's talking about CERN and quantum physics. So yeah, Jeff Peck, he explains it pretty simply actually. So this should be good.
Welcome to this episode of the Shark Tank Report. My name is Sam Johnson.
Yeah, Gabe took 2 vax. She didn't take the 3rd vax. But my granddaughter had, like my daughter and my grandkids, they're like me. They didn't take the vax. But my oldest granddaughter had to take a vax to work, and she gave in and done it. Now she's booked in at hospital to check her heart rate, because her heart rate is something like 160 beats a minute sometimes. So, yeah, well, I'm really worried about her. I haven't let her mother know that I think it's a side effect from the vax, but I am worried about her.
Your host, Tonight we have a great show about quantum physics, eschatology, the science behind demon possession, and the science behind God's omnipresence. We're joined by author and TV host, someone you may recognize, Josh Peck.
Yeah, that's true, Diane. They reckon there's about 30% placebos in them. So that's, yeah.
He is the author of Quantum Creation, Cherubim and Chariots, and the book we're going to be talking about today, Abaddon Ascending. Well, Josh, welcome to the Sharpening Report, or I guess I should say welcome back. How are you doing?
I'm doing good, Sam. It's good to see you, and I'm excited about this. I'm really excited to see how your first episode is going to go, and this is actually my first time, I think, as guest on the Sharpening Report. So, yeah, all around, it's very exciting.
Thank you, Diane.
I should tell the people at home, too, in case they're wondering, kind of what's going on. Sam's
Good night, Talia. Thanks for joining.
going to be the new host, and we're actually moving everything onto a new channel, which should be ready in July. But we want to jump in and start doing some new episodes as soon as possible. So the new episodes that are coming out, like this one, will be on my channel for the time being. Then they'll be moved over to the new channel, and yeah, we're thinking probably somewhere in July. But yeah, so for all the TSR fans out there, stay with us. We got some really exciting stuff coming up, and but yeah, I'm excited about this. So I don't want to talk too much about that. How are you doing, Sam?
Yeah, I'm doing great. I'm also thrilled to be here. I'm really excited to finally be doing the first interview, and what a better person to do than the creator of the show. So anyway, let's just dive into it. We're going to be talking a lot about Abaddon Ascending, the book you wrote with Thomas Horn. I guess the first question I had for you is, how did you take the two most complicated and difficult topics to understand, which is quantum physics and eschatology, the end times, and put them both in a book and then actually make it easy to understand?
Yeah, well, I first got interested in quantum physics because of my wife. She's a big-time science nerd, as am I, but I really learned a lot just about the writing process, about researching, about how to actually put something like this together in a way that people can understand, which that goes to the second part of your question, how to write something about eschatology and quantum physics that people can understand. And it's difficult. But that was, Tom really helped me out a lot with that. With my previous books, Quantum Creation and Cherubim Chariots, it was relatively simple because I took really basic ideas. And like what is a particle? I mean, it wasn't like kindergarten level stuff, but it was easy. But this book was going to tackle something way more in depth. It was going to tackle like quantum field theory and CERN and the book of Ezekiel and the weird parts of Revelation. Like the whole thing isn't weird, but like Revelation 9 with the locusts, and it was getting into some really heavy areas. And so I remember, Tom and I met a lot to work on this book and everything. And I remember asking him, how I like being the guy that can explain things simply, but I'm having a hard time with this, because he was even telling me when I would give him rough drafts of some chapters, you should this is good, but you should try to find a way to explain it that's a little easier for people to grasp. So he really helped me out a lot in those regards, just knowing when things are too complex and kind of when to just hit the main points and things like that. And then if people want to research further on their own, that's what footnotes are for. And so he helped me out a lot with that. So I believe that we were able to put out a book that is very in-depth, but it's also, I hope and pray that it's easy enough that the general public's going to understand it just fine. And so far, I haven't heard any feedback from people saying that it was over their heads. So that's a long-winded answer to your first question.
Yeah, I read the whole book. It's one of those books that's hard to put down because it's so fascinating the way you are able to tie in quantum physics into the Bible, and just the way you show the relation between science and the Bible. It's not at odds, but they work very well together. But that being said, let's just dive into some topics onto the book. One thing I found really interesting, and I guess it's a good way to jump into the weirdness of quantum physics, is you had a quote from Sean Carroll in there that said that there is no particles in the world. kind of what does that mean? Expand on that.
Yeah. And this was one of the most mind-blowing things for me, but also the most difficult to grasp. And I still kind of struggle to find a good way to explain it. I actually just did a show on the Vigilant Christian, Mario Brisson, his channel, and we talked about this. And I won't. It took me like an hour and a half just to get through, but I won't do that here. But through that though, I was able to kind of find some better ways to explain it. But basically, so for those who aren't familiar, I quote Sean Carroll a lot in the book, and it's because he's a physicist, but he's able to explain things in a way that people like me and you can understand, and that's what I want. That's what I want to bring to the Christian audience. Sean Carroll is not a Christian, but we should all be praying for him. He does allow a Christian physicist named Don Page. I have an interview with him in the book. He does allow him to do guest blogs and stuff for his website. So there's hope. But he's not a Christian, but he's very science minded, very much a physicist. But he has a way of explaining things that are easier than most physicists. So in this presentation that I found of him online, and people can look it up, if they look up Sean Carroll presentation, particles, fields, something like that, it'll probably come up. But he was talking about what's called quantum field theory, and it's actually the most accurate science known to man. It produces predictions like many orders of magnitude greater than any other science in the world. It's extremely accurate. And actually, and we'll probably get into this a little later, but the LHC at CERN, the big particle collider at CERN, wouldn't work if quantum field theory was incorrect. So it's an accurate portrayal of reality as we know it. Basically, what it says is that the world isn't made of particles the way that we think of particles. Like technically, particles exist just because we've given them that term. But usually when we think of a particle, we think of like a little ball of matter, and they combine together. Reality doesn't really work that way. What we think of as a particle is actually a wave, and that's what Sean Carroll meant when he said that particles don't really exist. It's the real reality is waves in what are called quantum fields. Quantum fields permeate all of space; they're everywhere around. We have like the gravitational field. It's everywhere, even out in the furthest reaches of space where there's nothing to increase the gravity field or increase the energy of the gravity field. There's still a gravity field there. So here, because we live on planet Earth, the gravity field is affected by the Earth, and we're attracted to the Earth because of that bend in the field. So every field is like that. The electromagnetic field is like that. That's why magnets stick to refrigerators. So it's essentially energy. A particle is really just a ripple in that energy or in a field. So an electron is it's a ripple or a wave in the electron field. There's no actual little sphere of there's no actual like piece of matter that what we normally think of as a particle. It's actually more like a packet of energy. Well, it's really even that is a little deceptive because it's really it's a ripple in a field. It's like a wave. So the real reality are quantum fields. That's the real reality. Everything that we see and interact with, everything is just interactions with different fields. It's fields interacting with other fields. That's all it is. Which is weird, and we're usually not taught that in school. Usually in high school science class, we're taught particle physics, which it's fine, it's accurate, it's just not complete, because it doesn't tell you what the particle is made out of or what really a particle is. And something that Sean Carroll said, he said, how many times have we been asked the question or thought about the question, light, is it a particle or a wave? And he's like, we're never given an answer to that, but I'm here to tell you, I'm going to give you the answer. It's a wave. There is no actual particle. It's a wave. So that was really interesting to me. And the whole presentation is like 2 hours long, but it's fascinating stuff. So quantum field theory, because that's how reality works, that's how particle colliders can create new particles out of like protons. You know, the LHC at CERN collides protons together to create something like a Higgs boson, which was discovered in 2012. And that has a lot of people confused. Like, well, how, you know, do the protons combine together to create this particle? Like, are the pieces of the proton still in the Higgs boson? And no, it doesn't work at all like that. What's actually happening is you have two ripples in the same field, in the proton field. You have two ripples that are colliding together. And when that happens, a lot of energy is released into the other fields that are around. Every particle has a field, and every field has a particle to it. So there's an up quark field and an electron field. For photons, it's the electromagnetic field. Like when the electromagnetic field vibrates, that vibration is the photon. So when they collide these packets of energy together, it creates even more energy because they're doing this at near light speed. And it resonates out and ripples these other quantum fields. And then they have detectors up so they can detect if a field they haven't discovered yet ripples, because they'll be able to tell by the properties of the particle, the packet of energy. And that's what happened in 2012 when they discovered the Higgs boson, you know, the God particle, and it made all the news. And then somehow, because physicists aren't really great at communicating how this stuff works, it was getting out there that the Higgs boson is what gives us mass, and it's not. It's not at all. Like, the Higgs boson is kind of interesting, but what it really meant, the real discovery is, because there's a Higgs boson, it means there's a Higgs field. It's proof that there's a field that we interact with, that the particles that make up our body interact with. That's what gives us mass. Mass is just an interaction. You know, it's not just the Earth like pulling down on us. You know, it's a piece of it, but it's not like actual physical substance. It's interaction with this field. And that was the real discovery. That was like what blew physics wide open. And this was only 5 years ago that this happened. So there's still a lot to discover. But it got miscommunicated to the press, and the press, instead of trying to get it right, you know, and trying to get it accurate, and at the same time, instead of physicists thinking and, you know, trying to come up with a way to explain it, you basically got like two ends of this horrible coin that just put out a story that wasn't true. You know, they did discover a Higgs boson, but that wasn't that important. And the real importance was the field. But the Higgs boson doesn't give us mass. It also shouldn't have been called the God particle. That was a big marketing thing. It's the only thing it has to do with God is what every particle has to do with God, that he created it. You know, you could call the electron the God particle, but it has nothing. There's nothing godlike. There's nothing like godlike, or there's nothing about it that they should have called it that. You know, it just doesn't make any sense. But it was just a big marketing thing.
Well, I find the name actually really interesting, that they call it the God particle, and a lot of people put a big G at the beginning. Do you think, I mean, especially with the way you put it in with the whole Tom Horner, it's all about like the ancient religions and that sort of thing. Do you think they call it the God particle, and we're just assuming it's the wrong God? Do you think it's maybe more applicable to, you know, their esoteric God and their maybe the ancient gods that they're trying to resurrect, or even the portal aspect that you mentioned?
Well, that's a really good point. Yeah, there seems to be this shadow governing body at CERN, and this is going to sound conspiratorial in like nut job land, but there's actual quotes and reasons to believe this. I don't believe, like 99% of the people that work at CERN, I think they're just physicists and scientists, and they just want to know about reality, and they don't have anything nefarious in mind. But I do believe that there's like 1% that's behind the scenes that's actually trying to do some messed up stuff. And one of the reasons that Tom and I believe this is exactly what you brought up. So for those who might not be familiar, the LHC, the Large Hadron Collider, basically all that means, hadron is a type of particle. It collides them, and it's very big. So Large Hadron Collider. And CERN is the governing body that decides what this machine is going to be used for. So the land that the LHC is built on even had and even the name CERN has really unexpected details in ancient history. So it was built over. Right now, it's built on the border of France and Switzerland, which is like a weird place. You know, who's going to build a machine like on the border of two countries? Like it's just weird. And they'll say, well, real estate out there is very expensive. Okay, build it somewhere else. You know, why does it have to be on the border of those two? And then it's also built underground, which there's no real reason it has to be. There are particle collider. You can have a particle collider. It doesn't have to be built underground. But then they'll say again, well, there's a city, you know, that it's built under, and real estate's expensive, and they don't want to have a big machine in their city. Okay, well, build it somewhere else. You know, they would be able to save a lot of money if they don't have to build it underground. It doesn't protect from radiation. It doesn't have anything to do with any of that. So it's weird. It's weird that they did that. But when you actually find out why that land, and this is why I believed in the 1% CERN governing body shadow thing, the actual land was sacred to ancient worshippers of Apollo, or Apollyon from the book of Revelation, or Abaddon in Hebrew. So it was built over a Roman city actually called Apolliacum, or Apolliacum. There's a couple different ways of saying it. And yeah, they worshipped Apollo. That was their god, and they actually believed that was where the bottomless pit was located. So it's really weird. So if there are people who make decisions, that are deciding the location of this thing, and if they do believe in that's the bottomless pit and all that stuff, and I'm not saying that it is, it's just they believe it is, then it makes sense why they would want to build it there. So it's totally weird. And then especially when you have people like the science director at CERN, Sergio Bertolucci. He's the director for research and scientific computing at CERN. He's actually quoted, and this isn't some weird conspiracy thing. This is on their website, on CERN's website. They make all this stuff public because they know they can. They have no accountability because nobody's looking for this stuff. But he's actually quoted as saying, "We plan to open a portal into an extra dimension. Out of this door might come something unknown." So very strange, and that does sound like weird conspiracy theories, like, oh, CERN is trying to open a portal. Yeah, right. Well, you have the science director on record saying that, but they also have released documentaries about how they plan to do this, actually using gravity, so this could be the answer to how to interpret Revelation 9. Which is basically the locusts and that whole thing. It could be. Now, of course, we know because Revelation 9 says that the keys of the bottomless pit are given to an angel. But we also learn from Revelation 2 that Jesus is the one that has the keys to death and hell. So I think what's going on there is at some point humanity needs to be judged. And God is allowing this angel to open the bottomless pit to judge the unrepentant world, because it also says those locusts only attack the people without the seal of God on their foreheads. So this is something that Christians are, whatever humanity's doing that's allowing this angel with the key to the bottomless pit to open it, Christians aren't comfortable with it. And I don't know of any Christian that that I know personally that's comfortable with anything CERN is doing.
Yeah, that's really well put, and I appreciate the background and all the information, things like that. So kind of going back a little bit to the science aspect of things, you talked about the different fields and the way that particles are really just kind of vibrations or just energy. Kind of applying that to the biblical perspective is, especially, I think the two things that pop into my mind is one, like, God spoke everything in the earth, which I think is a really cool idea that the science backs it up. And then two, God being everywhere, he could just be a field that kind of gets involved with everything. Is that kind of something that the science backs up, or am I way off on that?
Well, what's interesting is physicists are looking for a unified field theory. They want to figure out how they can mathematically unify the four forces, which is gravity, electromagnetism, strong nuclear and weak nuclear forces. They've been able to make a lot of headway in doing that with the strong and weak nuclear and the electromagnetic field, but gravity is different. Gravity, for some reason, it's a lot weaker than the other forces. But they are looking for an elementary field, and basically the word elementary just means that's as far as you can break it down. So let's say you have an atom, and an atom would not be considered an elementary particle because it's made of other particles. You have an electron that spins around protons, neutrons, and then even the protons and neutrons are made of quarks and gluons, and different forces are involved. Something like a quark would be an elementary particle because, as far as we know, it's not made of smaller parts. So they're looking for the same thing in fields. They know of about 12 fields. They know that there are 12 fields. Basically, every particle is some type of combination of 12 foundational particles. This is all like what's called the standard model of physics. So what they're wondering is, can it be broken down even more than that? Is there one single field that all these other fields come from? Can it be looked at Can it be looked at in that way? So there are physicists that are actively pursuing that as a possibility. And if so, even if not God directly, it's certainly a creation of God. And how that all works, I'm not sure. But it is really interesting that you brought up Hebrews 11:3, because it says that God spoke things into existence, and then things that are visible are made of things invisible. And the way that I look at the spoken word of creation, time would be in there too. Time is a creation of God's as well, which means that in eternity, which eternity just means a state outside of time, free from time. From that state, God spoke time and everything into existence. And a big thing that physicists don't ever want to touch is that they'll say, okay, something's vibrating these fields, but they don't know what. The only thing, and only a couple will even admit to this, the only thing that you might hear them say is, well, it's got to be something extra dimensional, but we don't really have any clue. We have no idea. Well, we know that energy can't be created or destroyed. Essentially, energy just it can transfer states and it can change, but it can't be created or destroyed. So if you have God outside of time, this is time isn't even a thing yet. And even that terminology isn't right, because for there to be a yet, there would have to be a before, and it doesn't work that way. But I only know time, so I can't understand. No human being could understand what timelessness would be like. But when I believe when he spoke everything into existence, I believe that's still happening now. When he did that, the entire timeline came out and was birthed, was brought forth from the beginning to the end, all of it. In that single word, spoken word of creation, all of it. So what that means, and it would have to be, because time wasn't even created yet. It would have to be. What that means is that we are actively right now a direct product of the voice of God. Like right now, he is still speaking. That's what our bodies are, our souls and our spirits. You can look at your hand. The only reason that you even have a hand that's made of particles, that it's a direct manifestation of the spoken word of God. I mean, we're in the image of God. That's what that means. Isn't that amazing?
That's mind blowing. I've never heard it said like that, and that's incredible. Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, that's what gets me excited about this kind of stuff.
That's very cool. So kind of, I guess. So talking about the different dimensions and jumping between, our dimension, the third dimension, the fourth, the fifth, the sixth, depending on how you want to look at it. There's this idea of quantum computing, and I know that idea comes across in many different ways to the conspiracy theorists who may be watching. It's very much they apply it to Jade Helm and that whole narrative, but then there's the physicist side. So kind of explain, what is quantum computing? What does that mean for everyday people?
Sure. So basically, quantum computing, and there's a wealth of conspiratorial, non-science, just speculation out there in the world about quantum computing. But basically, when you look into it, it's not as scary as like some would have you believe. But there are things to be concerned with. There are issues. the way that quantum computers work, and I do believe that quantum computers will be the next big thing. You know, I think the internet was the latest big thing that really changed the world. I think quantum computing is going to be like the next, like one of those, because photons and certain other particles, they have this ability called quantum entanglement. And it's really mysterious and it's weird, and physicists don't understand how it works, or because it supposedly breaks the laws of known physics, which just means that physics isn't complete, which is really exciting because that means there's new things to learn. But what it means is somehow if you have like an entangled pair of photons, you run some photons through a beam splitter and they're entangled. You can have, and there's other ways to do that, but this just happens naturally. You could have one photon on one end of the universe and one photon on the other end, and they can communicate with each other at an instant, faster than the speed of light. I mean, it's not even, speed isn't even a relevant term anymore. It's just instantly. They can communicate with one another. They know what the other's doing, because if you alter one, the other one alters as well. And physicists have a real hard time with this because it breaks the laws of physics. You know, Einstein showed that you just can't go faster than the speed of light because you run into all sorts of issues. So now, obviously, they haven't measured it to the scales of the universe, but they have been able to measure entangled particles at great enough distance that if there was any time between the interactions, they would have been able to measure it, and there haven't been. So what quantum computing does is it utilizes quantum entanglement to transfer information faster than light, you know, at an absolute instant, which on the surface would seem pretty cool. You know, there are times that I have to wait for a document to open, or I got to wait for the internet to open, or oh my gosh, in video editing, and you know this, you're a video editor too. There are times that there are times, and I do this for a living at Skywatch. Like I edit all the Skywatch TV episodes and Into the Multiverse, and you know I do a lot of this stuff. But there are times that like I just want to work, and my computer won't let me. I got to sit there and wait for it to background render, and I'm just waiting. It would be nice if that could just be done instantly. You know, I could get a lot more done. But at the same time, what concerns me about it is they don't know how this phenomenon works, and the only hypothesis that sort of makes some sense on how it might work is photons might be utilizing higher dimensions of space, possibly even time, in order to do this. For example, if we think about a triangle, if you add up the angles, you get 180 degrees. That's how many degrees are in any kind of triangle. But what happens if you measure a triangle and you get something that's greater than 180 degrees? Well, then either you're not good at counting or something else is going on here. What if that law of two-dimensional physics is broken? Well, you can have that if the triangle is on a sphere. If you add a third dimension to it, then you can have things that seem impossible, but actually are they're really possible when. So if a triangle is on a sphere, then you can have greater than 180 degrees, depending how much curvature there is in the sphere and things like that. When you add extra dimensions, you're able to get stranger phenomenon. Three-dimensional physics, or four-dimensional if we're counting time, it's not really complete because there are other dimensions. I think there's 12 altogether, but there are higher dimensions that also operate by laws of physics. And what we see in our three-dimensional world is only a slice of that. Just like if there was a two-dimensional world, and I use this analogy all the time, and so does every physicist that talks about extra dimensions. Chuck Missler uses it too. Flatland. If there's a two-dimensional universe called Flatland, and if they measure their physics, it's not going to be complete, because they don't have access to the third dimension. Like if it's flat, they wouldn't know about gravity. They would have no clue because they don't have up or down, so they don't know that they're being pulled down. They're not being pulled down on anything. They would have no way to measure that. Now, if it was vertical, then they could, right. But they would have different limitations even with that. So I think we're looking at something similar, and physicists believe this too, that we're looking at something similar with higher dimensions. And it seems like there's some very important people in the world that believe it's possible for us to interact with higher dimensions and for higher dimensions to interact with us. But yeah, that's basically like the whole extra. But you were asking about quantum computers. So my concern is if quantum entanglement does utilize extra dimensions to operate, and I believe it does, because I don't. Again, when you have these physical laws that are being broken, usually the answer is higher dimensions. If we utilize quantum computing, we're sending information into higher dimensions. Who knows what or who or what is receiving it, or what they could do with it. There's that whole angle there, and there's also the angle, like, does that count as trying to communicate with demons and fallen angels and things like that? Is this like a second heaven type of thing? So there are those issues, but even outside of that, and there's a big push in the world right now towards quantum computing, and especially, and I don't believe it's any coincidence, coming from CERN, because CERN, they record these particle collisions are petabytes and petabytes of information. They have a hard time storing all this information. They've actually just started dumping a bunch of it onto the internet, because they can't analyze. They could have discovered every particle in existence, but they have so much data that they have to weed through, they wouldn't know it. So they've been putting it on the internet, hoping that they can get some help just from amateur physicists and people who know how to read that stuff, because there's just not enough people to do it. So what CERN, they believe that they would really benefit from something like quantum computing, because if you could have a machine analyze all that data and store it through quantum entanglement, you could store stuff. You would have limitless storage capacity, basically, especially if it's utilizing higher dimensions. And it would be at an instant. All this would just be done for you, which, again, sort of sounds like a nice idea. It'd be nice to know things, but, the people in charge, what are they going to do with that information? If they find a unified field theory, what are they going to do with that? This actually gets into consciousness, because along with quantum computing, for CERN to really use it for what they want to use it for, they need some type of artificial intelligence to drive it, because you can't just teach a computer what to look for. You got to have something that can think to know what to look for. That's why people analyze the data. You have to have a thinking thing. So they're also trying to develop artificial intelligence, which that's no secret. I mean, there's been a bunch of attempts made online, which is kind of funny, because every time they develop one of these things and it's released online, the artificial intelligence starts getting influenced by people online, and then it starts saying things like Bush did 9/11, and it gets really racist and stuff.
Yeah.
So there's still some bugs they have to work out, but in their view, they want to have some type of artificial intelligence to analyze all this data. Now, what's frightening about that is if you have a true artificial intelligence, we have no way of knowing if it's actually truly artificial, or if it's something like a demon could inhabit, or a fallen angel, or Satan himself. We have no way of knowing that. We know devils can possess people, even animals. So why not machines? So there's that aspect to it, but there's also this big question, and I deal with this in the book. There's this big question of consciousness. Physicists have no idea what consciousness is. Just the state of being self-aware. They don't know what's causing that. We're biologically no different from somebody who died a minute ago. But they're not conscious anymore. So what's the difference? And one of the leading theories is called, but most physicists don't take this seriously, but it's the only theory right now. It's called quantum brain dynamics. And the idea is consciousness might sort of be like mass, in that consciousness might be an interaction with a quantum field. Now, this wouldn't have anything to do with the spirit or the soul or anything like that. This is just, biological, physiological consciousness. Animals would be subject to this too. That maybe consciousness is just an interaction with the field. Now, if that's true, They've even come up with names for this hypothetical field. It's called the cortical field, and because every field has a particle associated, the particle to the field is called a corticon. Totally hypothetical at this point, but with what they're doing at CERN, discovering new particles, there could come a day where they said that you turn on the news and it's the next Higgs boson thing. You know, we discovered the corticon. It's the particle that makes you conscious. And, you know, I'm sure it'll get spun like that in some weird way. But they could discover this, and if they do, to them they just cashed in, because right now the way that they're trying to develop artificial intelligence, they have to hire a lot of programmers. It costs a lot of money, a lot of time, and it's just an impossible feat. But if they can create and manipulate corticons, you know, if you know, the particle of consciousness, they could put that in a machine and just develop artificial intelligence with them. I mean, it would be a lot more cost effective, way cheaper. Instead of having a whole team of developers and coders to do this, you could have like just one guy do it. And they don't have to do anything different than what they're already doing at CERN, you know, with these particle collisions and things. So that could be their ticket into artificial intelligence. So if you unleash that with quantum computing, you know, access to, so, okay, we created consciousness, and there's a conscious being that we made, and let's just give it access to things we don't even know about and see what happens, you know. So that I could be, this is speculative, that might be what the image of the beast is all about. Could be. Because if we think about who, you know, what we are, we're the image of God, you know, the creative voice of God, and we interact in these fields, and you know, we're the image of God. So how could the enemy twist something like that? Well, if you merge artificial intelligence with quantum computing, that could be a way to do it. So, but basically that's the danger in quantum computing. If the world gets connected, and I believe it probably will, if the world gets connected in with quantum computing, yeah, we'll be able to get a lot more stuff done, and it'll probably make life more convenient in some areas, but other areas we're going to be a lot more exposed. I mean, remember before the internet, there was, you know, this thing called privacy that people had, and it just doesn't exist anymore. But the scariest thing is we give up our privacy. We are the ones freely telling Facebook every detail of our day. You know, Facebook isn't asking us that. The internet isn't making us do any of that. We kind of have this want to be exposed. If we think that, you know, like in a prideful way, if we think we can be impressive, or somebody's going to be impressed by that. Well, I think quantum computing is the next level of that, except it won't be just like a physical type of thing. It's going to be more on a spiritual level. You know, we're going to be exposed spiritually, which is it's dangerous. So yeah, that's in a nutshell. Well, a very large nutshell, but that's quantum computing and all that stuff.
Yeah, you paint a really good picture of the duality of CERN. On one hand, if you're just looking at it purely from the science aspect, they're just doing these things, trying to find this new field, and then now they need more computing to record everything, and now they need someone to sift through the data, so they create artificial intelligence. It seems pretty innocent from that aspect. Then you have this, I guess, more conspiratorial view of it, is you have these scientists who have stated they're trying to reach another dimension, and they're trying to create a computer that can communicate with another dimension. Now they're trying to create something that they can house something from another dimension. So it's kind of it's an interesting duality that you paint there. So you talk a lot about how our consciousness can be influenced if the right technology is created. You even talked about how a lot of the technocracy movement can affect us. So expand on that a little bit. Right,
and I'm glad you brought that up. That's a whole other side to this. If and it would be the governments of the world that would have access. You know, this type of thing. You know, quantum computing might be available to the consumer, but actually being able to manipulate corticons, if they exist, creating consciousness, that likely will be held, you know, just for the governments. But there's a whole other side to this, and I'm glad that you brought this up. If they can create consciousness, they can also alter consciousness that already exists. Just like they can alter any particle, they can alter any field, they can send energy into fields. If consciousness is an interaction in a field like that, that is a weapon of unimaginable magnitude. That is like in the wrong hands. That is hive mind across the whole world. Like that's like, and it reminds me of the Tower of Babel incident. And here's something that not a lot of people know. In Scripture, it says that during the whole Tower of Babel, Nimrod, you know, all that stuff, that the entire world, they were gathered in one place, and it says they were of one language and one speech. And it's weird. It's weird in the English because it's like, well, that's just saying the same thing twice. Okay, they all spoke the same language. That's only what one of those words in Hebrew means. The other one means a mindset, like a belief system or like a motivation, like a mindset. And I liken it to like a hive mind. They're all sort of thinking the same thing. Now I don't know how Nimrod did that, probably through a lot of fear tactics and stuff like that. But yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what it is. So I think that if they develop this type of technology where they can actually alter corticons in somebody, alter the way that they interact with the cortical field if it exists, they have a very easy technology to just annihilate anyone they want, just make somebody dead instantly, or turn them into like super soldiers, turn them into like just mindless slaves, you know. And there are certain verses in Revelation that if that was how this happens, kind of like the whole mark of the beast thing, part of the mark of the beast is you have to willingly accept it. You know, you have to be of that mindset. That's right there in Scripture. You can't. I don't believe you can be forced to have the mark of the beast, because it says that you know, those who receive the mark, they have to worship the beast too. So they have to be part of that mindset. I don't think that's something that can be done to somebody. But if this whole hive mind kind of thing happens, then that could be an answer to how that could be, you know, an interpretation of how that could come about in the world. So so it's a scary thought, because I love being an American. You know, I love America, but I totally don't trust our government all the time. And even with President Trump, and I love President Trump so much. I'm going to get flack for that. That's considered hate speech, not only to liberals but to the church too. I won't get on that rabbit trail.
Anyway, yeah, that's
but yeah, I still don't. I don't trust people in power, especially with technology like that. Because why, with a government who has no accountability, with businesses who have no accountability, and right now they don't. And this is why I believe it's so important that Christians should get a hold of this stuff, because we need to know what's going on in the world that we're living in, so we can hold them accountable. You know, the only reason they're able to do all this stuff is because nobody cares except the conspiracy nuts that nobody wants to listen to anyway. So we need like actually good, sound, grounded Christians. You know, people like you, and I hope myself, and our amazing audience, the TSR audience. I love all you guys. Are great. We need people like that to get interested and start learning about this kind of stuff. Because when you have, if you develop that technology and you have a government that's not accountable to anybody, it doesn't even have to be America. It could be North Korea. Oh my gosh, can you imagine if they had access to that? The whole world would be dead, or we'd all be. But it would be bad. I don't want to say, you know, but yeah, go ahead.
It just sounds to me like you are getting the science definition of demon possession, and that's like, it's because that's basically what it sounds like, and you're applying basically the science behind being possessed by a demon, which I think is fascinating. That I've never heard that discussed like that before.
Yeah, and that's the other part of that too, because they could create a new consciousness in somebody if this field, if this is how consciousness works. They could replace your consciousness, which I imagine would kill you, but they could replace that with an artificial intelligence. Or maybe it wouldn't even be humans. Maybe it's the artificial intelligence that gets loose, you know, on the internet, or in the interconnected quantum computer world of the future. Maybe that artificial intelligence decides, you know, humanity's better off if they just listen to what I say. You know, I know what's best for them because I'm a lot smarter than them. It would be easy, especially if it's already a demon anyway. It'd be easy for it to develop an ego, and it could just decide, that, well, we'll just enslave humanity and
What?
we'll tell them what to do to progress the world the way that it should go. And we, by not being actively, at least considering some of these things, by just keeping our heads in the sand and just shutting it out, and by thinking that we're too stupid to understand it. That's one of the biggest parts of why Tom and I wrote this book, is to show you're not too stupid to understand this stuff. I can't. Maybe you can't do the math. I can't do the actual math of any of it. But the big picture stuff, the stuff that is important, that we should be holding these people accountable for, or at least asking questions about. We're not too stupid to understand that. The reason that scientists and physicists put that out there is because they want to escape accountability. And they also know that they need funding. And if they have, rich people that, might be nervous about some of the things that they're doing, they want the trust of those people. That's why when the whole, a few years ago, the whole, is CERN going to create a black hole thing blew up. And actually, a guy in Hawaii tried to sue CERN, and it didn't go anywhere. The case immediately got thrown out. It went nowhere. And I don't believe CERN is going to create a black hole in the sense that we think of black holes. That's going to like annihilate the Earth, because we have the Bible, we know prophecy. It doesn't end like that. But there are other things. I think that whole black hole thing was a big distraction, because there are other things that they develop at CERN and they want to do at CERN, like create a gravitational communication system. And I wrote a whole chapter about that in the book, and how it connects with the book of Ezekiel and the book of Revelation, chapter 9. And they know they don't have to make it a secret, because nobody's looking for this stuff, and nobody's holding them accountable. And if anybody tries to hold them accountable, they're laughed at, like the guy in Hawaii, because he didn't really have he had no science backing. He had no real evidence. He just felt like they shouldn't do it, and he thought that was enough. It's like, man, it's great. It's great that you're trying to do something, but get educated first. Listen to a podcast or something first, so you can bring some kind of ammunition to the table. But that's why I think it's so important.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the call to activism, because that's what we want this show to be about, is learning and then going out and changing things. And so I got one last kind of connection to make in regards to quantum consciousness. Because we talked about the dark side of it, of how demon possession could or some sort of possession could come in and change our consciousness. But I also want to tie that into what we talked about earlier in God's field, that maybe He produces to become omnipresent, and how when we're tied into that, then we are tied into the field or the God, so we don't have to worry about. And I think that's something that we need to be encouraged about too, because it's easy to see stuff and get really terrified of what's going on, but just to remember that when we're tied with God, we're totally fine. And then so I guess something to kind of end on as we kind of wrap this up is one thing that you said in your book I thought was really funny. You said, yeah, CERN could really completely undo reality, and that's something that Christians can look forward to. I thought that was funny.
Yes, absolutely, because we do know all of this in the way that we know it, physical reality, it's going to end. It's going to be changed. It's going to be different. We know the elements are going to melt with a fervent heat. And I did a whole chapter on that, what that means. That's actually in the Hebrew, it's talking about the elementary particles. There's this whole scenario called the Higgs field doomsday that a couple of physicists had talked about. If people are interested, they can look up Higgs field, Joe Lykken, it's Lykken. Watch his presentation on the Higgs field doomsday. It's phenomenal. It's really interesting, and he talks about it in a way that anybody can understand. But basically, it's that the Higgs field right now is at this knife's edge of energy, where if just a little bit more was added or taken away, it could go careening off of this cliff where it would get super energized. And basically that would mean that particles get so heavy that they create black holes. Particles become their own black holes. So everything is a giant black hole, and all of reality is now the true vacuum where nothing physical can exist, because particles are black holes. Right now, outer space isn't a true vacuum. Some scientists will say this stupid thing. They'll say, empty space isn't really empty. And I think that's the stupidest way to say it. That just sounds confusing and it sounds new agey and it's dumb. What they should say is outer space isn't empty, or empty space doesn't really exist the way we think about it. You know, even in the furthest reaches of space, you still have fields. You still have what are called virtual particles, little quantum fluctuations in fields that, you know, they come and go. You know,
with Reckon, you only pay for what you need. Reckon, fair. Tissues in your pockets, not fair. Reckon.
This balsam hill tree makes decorating easy. True needle foliage makes this
as fast as possible. Those are called virtual particles, but you have all that kind of stuff. But if every particle became you know, a black hole, then you would have the true vacuum where it is truly empty. That's why I believe that's why there's a Shiva statue in front of CERN, because that whole statue thing, Shiva's doing what's called the Nataraya dance to undo a weary universe and bring a new one in. And they have that at CERN, where they are literally pumping energy into the Higgs field. And so it's like, come on, guys, like, you gotta, don't you know, like, your own stuff, like, you're the one saying that this could happen and you're doing it anyway, like, but it hasn't happened yet. But I do believe that might be the process that God uses to create the new heavens and the new earth. You know, the whole particle thing, the way that God has reality now is awesome, but it's not eternal. It's not. We're still in time. We have boundaries called Planck boundary. You know, there's just a lot of things that eternity won't have. Now, if we're in our new bodies, we'll be able to withstand any change just fine. You know, we'll have bodies. And I don't know the physics of that. I can't find anything in scripture that I could even speculate on how it works, but it doesn't seem like it's particles and fields anymore. But yeah, so in the book, I detail how I think that the Higgs field doomsday thing will happen, just maybe not in the way that certain physicists believe, like with Shiva and the destruction of the universe, and, you know, they'll be saved. And it's just ridiculous. I think God has a plan, and this is why we don't need to fear this. And this is why, if and when this does happen, we can celebrate. Because if we're in Jesus Christ, if we've accepted Jesus as our Lord and Savior, this is all good news for us. You know, this is good. The Lord Jesus is coming back, and we get to rule and reign with Him. So that's something for us that we can hold on to. That no matter how bad things get, we are safe if we're His. And just like you said, we're a product of Him. You know, we're interacting in a sense with His field all the time. That's how we can't escape out of His hands. You know, that's how you know, the devil or an angel, nothing can take us from His hands, because it's a done deal. We've accepted Jesus Christ as our Savior, and He's going to take care of us. So no matter what happens, we're safe. Even if we die, we're still safe because we're His, and we're eternally linked with Him. So you're absolutely right, Sam. There are dark things, but more importantly than all of that, Jesus is our hope. He's our rest. He's our salvation.
Amen.
Jesus Christ is the way that, you know, we can be interested in this stuff. We can even prepare for it, but we don't need to fear it. And so I'm glad that you brought that up. I don't usually get asked that. You know, a lot of times when I do interviews, they want the doom and gloom stuff, and I'm really glad that you've given equal time to both sides of the coin here. And I think ending on that note, that, you know, that Jesus Christ is our hope and our reward. And if you at home, if you don't know Jesus yet and you want to, you can ask Him, and He will. It says in Scripture that if we draw nigh to God, He will draw nigh to us. You don't have to understand everything right off the bat. You won't. You're not going to. I've been a Christian pretty much my entire life, and I'm not anywhere close to understanding everything. But that's where faith steps in. You take a step of faith and say, Lord Jesus, you know, I want to know You. You know, who are You? What do you have for me? I don't understand all this salvation stuff. You know, He will teach you. If you have a willing heart and you really want to know the Lord, he'll meet you halfway. You draw nigh to him, he'll draw nigh to you, meaning you make the first step, because you have freedom of choice. He's given you free will. He's not gonna force his way into your life or anything, but you make the first step and ask him, and he promises he'll meet you halfway. He'll draw nigh to you. So I challenge you at home, if you don't know the Lord Jesus Christ yet, try him out. I mean, what's the worst that could happen? Try Jesus, ask him, talk to him, and see what happens.
Amen, man. That's wonderfully put. I couldn't agree more. If you don't know the Lord, and people are saying science and the Bible can't work together, I mean, we just proved that wrong on the quantum level.
Amen.
So Josh, thank you so much for coming, being on the show. So where can people find you?
Yes. Well, as far as right now, sharpeningreport.com. Although once the official handing over of the show, goes completely to you, that'll be your website, and I'm gonna have a different one. But people can find my stuff on sharpeningreport.com, which I'll have to update. But also skywatchtv.com. They can find all my stuff there. I think there's still a big package with our book, Abaddon Ascending, and if it's the same deal, it has like $400 worth of other materials that go along with the book for only, I think, like $39.95 or something like that. So it's a really good deal. I think it's still there. So if people want to go to skywatchtvstore.com, they'll be able to find it. At the very least, they'll find the book, and I'm sure it's in some type of package, because Tom likes to do that. He likes to take care of his audience, which is really cool. And then people can find me on Facebook. I'm always on Facebook. And if they want to email me directly, it's joshpeckdisclosure@gmail.com, or if it's easier to remember, jpeck@skywatchtv.com.
Awesome, Josh. Thank you again for coming back. And
so this is in line with quantum physics, what the stream's about, Di. So I thought I'd throw this in as well. Pretty interesting.
Is back at Stanford this year as a research scholar. One of the unfortunate side effects of a short term.
Invited to the interval, just perfect place to tell some of the first science fiction stories. Here's my clicker. I'm gonna move this. A bit about myself. I'm a historian of ancient science. And so I investigate the crossroads between classical Greek myth, archaeology, history, art. I'm interested in uncovering nuggets of historical and scientific realities that are embedded in mythology and ancient writings. So you could say I'm a historian of ancient curiosity. I'm seeking the first inklings of the scientific impulse. For my book, Gods and Robots, I asked who first imagined robots, automatons, self-moving devices. Most historians would trace the first automatons to the Middle Ages with the clockwork mechanisms, but I wondered, could the ideas, the concepts of automatons, creating animated statues, self-moving devices, could those ideas have been imagined long before the technology existed, made them possible? And I should warn you that some philosophers of science actually claim no one in antiquity could imagine automatons until the technology already existed. They're misinformed. Where does innovation come from if it doesn't come from imagining what doesn't already exist? And it turns out that as early as the time of Homer, more than 2,500 years ago, the Greeks were imagining, now in myth, how one might fabricate artificial life, self-moving devices, animated beings, artificial beings. These entities were always described as products of technology. I'm not talking about lifeless objects or inert matter that's brought to life by a magical spell or just a god's command. The process that the Greeks imagined for these entities could be called biotechne, ancient Greek for life through craft. That's the root of our word biotechnology. Now, automatons that were always described as made, not born, manufactured, not reproduced biologically, appeared in some myths that I think you're all probably pretty familiar with. You're just not used to looking for automatons in them. So I'm going to be talking about Jason and the Argonauts, the firebringer Prometheus, and Pandora. These remarkable tales about creating artificial life were ancient thought experiments about what could be achieved if only you had the creativity and the powers of a god or the gods. And I should add, these myths were taken seriously by philosophers and playwrights in antiquity as ways to think about trying to imitate, improve, or surpass nature. And what's interesting for us tonight is that they foreshadow some of the doubts and fears that robotics and AI technology that we're facing today. One rising anxiety today is the potential for totalitarian oppression. Maybe some of you read the article by Yuval Harari, Why Technology Favors Tyranny. He predicted AI will empower human tyrants to impose ever greater totalitarianism with ever greater ease. Now, that association between technology and tyranny, that might seem like a very modern concept, but I'm here to tell you tonight that it's a very old story. I found that Greek myths about artificial life, they have a striking feature in common. All of the automatons and self-moving devices are deployed by those with supreme power, either gods like Zeus or kings. So as early as Homer, and we're talking about 750, 650 BC, people were imagining robotic servants, lifelike replicas of humans and animals, and even AI. And most of these were made by Hephaestus, the god of technology and invention. He's the only god with a job. He's the only god who sweats. He's always shown at work in his fort. He's a blacksmith, and he has wonderful powers. He has a brilliant resume of techno marvels. Homer's Iliad describes how Hephaestus constructed a set of automatic bellows for his forge. These bellows could blow or blast air according to his needs in his forge. So he didn't need to adjust them. They could anticipate what he needed. Hephaestus also built a set of automatic gates for the heavens so that they could open and close at the approach of the gods' chariots. The first automated garage doors, you might say. I don't want to draw any direct lines from antiquity to today's innovations, but you just can't help thinking of these things. Next, he fabricated a fleet of self-driving delivery carts that they brought nectar and ambrosia to the gods' banquets, and then they returned when they were empty. I think his most amazing invention was the crew of female androids made of gold. I wish I had an ancient picture of them. These will have to do. They served as his personal assistants, and they moved around efficiently to and fro in his workshop. Homer describes these golden maidens as he says that they looked like real young women, just like real young women, and they were endowed with strength, reason, and mind. But even more mind-blowing, he says they were equipped with all the knowledge of the gods. All the knowledge of the gods. That's quite a data dump. I mean, you don't need that much. You don't need that much knowledge, but who knows? You never know, you might. But it does make you think of a mythical version of AI. These were labor-saving devices, that intelligent machines, and they were all made for the benefit of the gods and goddesses. And when they're confined to the realm of the heavens, Hephaestus's inventions, they're benign, they're charming, they're harmless. But when such things are sent down to earth, that's when the trouble starts. Violence and suffering follow. Let's consider the fate of Prometheus. I'm sure you all remember. He stole divine fire, a technology of fire, to help human beings. And in the myth, Zeus, the all-powerful king of gods and men, was a vindictive tyrant. To punish Prometheus, he chained him to a mountain, and then he ordered Hephaestus, and we hear that it was against Hephaestus's will, but he was ordered to do this, to forge a bronze eagle to torment Prometheus. And Zeus's eagle was imagined as a metallic raptor that arrived like clockwork each day, almost drone-like. In the Argonautica, the epic poem of Jason and the Argonauts, the sailors observed the eagle's machine-like movements. And I'll just quote from the Argonautica, each afternoon, the gleaming eagle flew over our ship with a loud whirring noise, and we saw how the feathers of each wing rose and fell, moved up and down like a bank of polished oars. Now, Zeus, of course, always really vindictive, he took vicious revenge on humankind for accepting the gift of stolen fire. He commanded Hephaestus to construct a ravishing and seductive artificial young woman. And Zeus's specifications were this should be evil disguised as beauty. And you all know who it was. It was Pandora. Probably not the Pandora of the fairy tales of your youth. She was not just an innocent young woman. Poets describe this female android as made, not born. So she's a technological product. She was to be sent to Earth with a sealed jar that was filled with misfortunes and suffering to plague humans for eternity. And in the myth, here we see a vase painting of Zeus admiring Pandora before he sends her down to Earth. And in the myth, we hear that Zeus took sadistic glee in his plan. It was said that he laughed out loud as he admired Pandora, his gift for humanity. So she was really a fembot with one mission on Earth, to insinuate herself into human society and then unseal that jar, the swarm of evils would then come out and plague humankind forever. And Zeus ordered his messenger Hermes to escort Pandora to Earth. There's an interesting vase painting, I don't have a picture of it, but it shows Zeus and Hermes exchanging a sly smile as they are about to inflict Pandora on Earth. Well, Hermes took Pandora down to Earth and gave her as a bride to a happy-go-lucky guy named Epimetheus. Epimetheus was Prometheus's brother, and Prometheus warned Epimetheus not to accept the dangerous gift from Zeus. But Epimetheus was dazzled by Pandora. He went for the short-term gains, and we hear from the poets only later did he realize his terrible error after she opened the jar. And I just want to point out the name Prometheus in ancient Greek, it means forethought, looking ahead. And Epimetheus, it means hindsight. Epimetheus is the perfect patsy for Zeus's cruel trick. This is a very famous vase showing Pandora being prepared for her mission. And the artist, you can see all the other figures are really moving around, they're active. Pandora's standing there stiffly like a sort of statue or a doll. She has an uncanny smile on her face as she's being prepared for her assignment on Earth. And here's a close-up of that. I think Pandora is kind of eerily similar to the evil robot Maria in the great silent film Metropolis. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend this film. It's 1927 silent film. It was made just a few years after the invention of the word robot, and already in 1927, people were imagining a future techno dystopia where the rich ruling class oppressed the miserable workers with automation and robots. In the Greek myths, as I noted, Hephaestus's automatons are harmless as long as they're confined to the realm of the gods. So these stories seem to be telling us that intelligent machines like self-moving carts and the golden servants, they're good to imagine as thought experiments, but the myths imply that such things can be pretty dangerous and destructive in the real world of humans. Now, another ancient myth tells how Hephaestus forged the first bronze robot, and I can't resist showing Ray Harryhausen's fabulous image of Talos, the giant bronze robot. The automaton was called Talos, and it was made for King Minos, who ruled Crete with an iron hand. So Talos was a killer robot. He was intended to defend the island kingdom of King Minos, and he was programmed to spot strangers, spot anyone coming ashore, and actually could pick up and hurl boulders at ships to sink them. And the coins of ancient Crete boasted about that capability of Talos. Now, should anyone make it ashore in close combat, this bronze robot could heat his body red hot, grab up a victim, hug them to his chest, and roast them alive. And this mirror shows that capability.
Hey, Lynn, good to see you.
Talos was imagined as a kind of cyborg, half human, half machine. He's able to carry out complex activities, and he fits the definition of robot in a way because we know details about his inner workings, and he even has a power source. Talos, we're told, had a single tube or a conduit that went from his head to his feet. And in that tube or conduit pulsed ichor. Ichor is the life fluid of the immortal gods. That's his power source. The entire Viva-system, if you will, was sealed. The whole system was sealed with a bronze bolt on his ankle. It's his weak point. When they dropped anchor in Crete, Jason and the Argonauts, it looked like they were doomed to be Talos's next victims. But luckily for them, they had the sorceress Medea along with them, and she figured out how to destroy Talos. She realized that if you remove the bronze bolt in the robot's ankle, his power source would drain out. And ancient Greek vase paintings from 2,500 years ago showed Jason using a tool to remove the bolt. This is an example. This power source, ichor, then we're told, flowed out like molten lead. It's a kind of technological description. The great robot of King Minos toppled over and expired. So not only was Talos created with technology, but he was taken down with technology. Technology was required to dismantle him. And it's interesting that the ancient Greek artists really emphasized the sort of human-like traits of this bronze machine and his unfair death. I mean, after all, he's killed just while he's doing his job, right? He's doing his job for the tyrant king. And if you look closely at this vase painting, you can see that the artist has painted a teardrop on the robot's cheek. Kind of reminds you of Hal, the death of Hal in 2001. Medea also figured out how to overcome yet another set of deadly automatons forged by Hephaestus for yet another king who wanted Jason dead. This king ordered Jason to carry out two impossible tasks. First, he had to yoke a pair of bronze fire-breathing bulls and then plow a field with these animated bronze oxen. And then he had to defeat the invincible army of robot-like warriors that would spring up from the plowed field. And the evil king was confident that even if Jason could somehow avoid being burned to death by the robo-bulls, he and his men would be slaughtered by the armed androids springing up from the field. Well, Medea created a special drug to give Jason superpowers to wrangle the bronze bulls so he could plow that field without being incinerated. And then at nightfall, the dreadful warriors in bronze armor began to emerge from that plowed field. This is a medieval image, but I think it's pretty good. Techno wizard Medea to the rescue again. Now, Medea, you really want her on your side. You're going to be facing these automatons. She's an ancient hacker. She figures out the vulnerable points, the weak points, and she exploits them. She knew that those automatons or unnatural soldiers were essentially hardwired to attack. She cleverly hacked the coding imprinted in the soldiers. What she did, she told Jason to throw some stones into their midst, into their ranks, and that would trigger a fatal domino effect, a sort of cascade effect. They would sense the blows on their shields, and then they turn immediately to the person closest to them, and they turn on each other in a frenzy. Confusion ensues, and then Jason and the Argonauts can rush in and finish them off. And they escape the evil king's plot. Well, notice that in all of these myths, the machines of malice belong to tyrannical rulers, whether it's Zeus or mythical kings. They used automatons to wield absolute power, to torture, or to kill. So was this use of biotechne, is it only an imaginary feature of cruel tyrants in mythology? What about real life? What about the real world? Did any actual tyrants deploy real automatons and machines in historical times? Yes, they did. In fact, the autocratic fascination with automatons as instruments of power was not just a theme in the classical myths. Like their counterparts in the myths, the autocratic rulers, many of them, I found quite a few examples, commissioned animated statues and machines to inflict pain and death. And this was documented as early as the 6th century BC. And I don't know if I should give a trigger warning. Some of these stories are pretty grim. The first example, historical example, involves a fiery bronze bull to incinerate victims. Now, was it inspired by the bronze robot Talos, heating his body red hot? Or maybe the fire-breathing bulls in the myth, that's unknown. This particular deadly bronze bull belonged to the cold-blooded tyrant named Phalaris of Sicily, and he became absolute dictator of the island in 570 BC. During his reign of terror, a brilliant sculptor named Peraleus presented King Phalaris with the statue of a bull so true to life it seemed to breathe. Now, I want to note here that ancient artists were capable of making incredibly realistic sculptures of people and animals. These are all real examples of bronze statues from antiquity that have inlaid eyes and pupils, inlaid fingernails, teeth, and even eyelashes. And remember, they weren't just bronze like these. They were painted realistically with natural looking paint that actually contained wax in the pigment so that they really looked real. Some of them were animated. Some could blink. They could turn their heads. They could move their arms, and some could make sounds. Peraleus, the craftsman, explained to the king that this hollow bronze bull was a torture device. Just lock someone inside and build a fire under it. As the bull's body heats up, the man roasts to death, he said. Peraleus then described the fiendish system of tubes that he had installed in the bull's interior. And these tubes directed smoke and flames to come out of the bull's nostrils, and the pipes amplified the victim's shrieks through the bull's mouth. It gave the impression of a real bellowing, fire-breathing bull like those in the myth of Jason and the Argonauts. Well, the statue is essentially animated by the human being trapped inside and the apparatus inside. King was impressed. He asked for a demonstration. As soon as Peraleus crawled inside to yell into the pipes, Phalaris locked the trap door and roasted his first victim. And there would be many more. Now, Phalaris was detested for his brutality, and this story is told by many historians. Many of them actually saw the bull afterwards, so it really did exist. He was detested for his brutality. He was finally overthrown after about 20 years. But that diabolical bronze bull lived on, not just in stories, but physically. More than 300 years later, during the First Punic War between Rome and Carthage, Hannibal's father, Hamilcar Barca, invaded Sicily during the First Punic War. He plundered the treasures of Sicily, and one of his prizes was the notorious bronze bull. He shipped it to Carthage, across the Mediterranean into Tunisia. The bull remained in Carthage for another 100 years. Now, we can only guess how the bull served the rulers of Carthage, but I will remind you that the Carthaginians were reported to sacrifice their children in a furnace shaped like their god. When the Roman general Scipio finally defeated Carthage, 146 BC, he recovered the bronze bull and he shipped it back to Sicily. And he set it up as a monument, he said, to the viciousness of tyrants like Phalaris. The message is trust the Romans and you won't have any more tyrants like this. The sculptor, Heraclius, was also castigated for using his skills to make such a project for a tyrant. Phalaris, sorry to say, was not the only malicious ruler to own a realistic statue that was brought to life by the screams of the burning victim. Sicily, it turns out, was a hotbed of such devices. There were many others. Another Sicilian king burned people inside a giant bronze statue of a man. Yet another king in Sicily had a realistic bronze stallion that he used for the same purposes. And these kings were known to offer rewards to artisans and inventors for making novel torture machines. And now I just want to point out that novel machines of war were also rewarded by powerful kings. In 400 BC, the tyrant Dionysius of Syracuse, Sicily again, invited inventors to a contest to make advanced weapons. And that competition is what resulted in the first mechanized catapults, taking warfare to new levels of killing. Rewards and prizes started attracting military engineers and inventors to the courts of Philip II of Macedonia, Alexander's father, Demetrius Poliorcetes, also of Macedonia, and Mithridates the Great of Pontus. The brilliant scientist Archimedes also devised many ingenious war machines for Sicily. You can see an example there on the right, lower right, of a giant claw that would pick up ships and sink them. And so while military engineers were developing crossbow artillery and powerful torsion catapults in the 4th and 3rd centuries, other engineers and inventors were flocking to Alexandria, Egypt. Alexandria, Egypt at that time was the Silicon Valley of antiquity, that had the museum, the library, and inventors actually designed and constructed a great variety of self-moving devices, self-driving theaters, complex automatons, some of them miniature, some of them colossal, using mechanics, and they even had plans to use magnetism. King Ptolemy II of Alexandria commissioned their most advanced designs for his magnificent spectacles in Alexandria. His grand procession of 279 BC, it was just an outrageous parade of stunning engineering marvels that wound through the streets for days. You can see the streets of Alexandria in this lower right here. And there were many monumental, lifelike, animated statues of gods and goddesses, each on carts pulled by 300 men. On one cart, for example, sat a colossal 15-foot tall goddess. She was dressed in real silk clothing, sitting there regally on her throne, and then periodically along the route of the parade, this automaton stood up, poured a jug of milk into a large bowl, and then sat down again. All very stately manner, of course. During his reign, King Ptolemy executed many members of his family and his political enemies. He declared himself a god, But his automatons, as far as we know, were nonviolent. So those grandiose spectacles of technology were intended to drive home his godlike absolute power. Well, history records another dictator who demonstrated his iron rule in another parade with another giant self-moving automaton. After the Macedonians crushed democratic Athens, they set up the brutal tyrant Demetrius to rule the city. He destroyed the democracy, and he commissioned a giant animatronic snail. Now, I hear there's someone here who has a snail that he drives around town. So, what a coincidence. I guess snails have been automaton snails have been a thing for centuries, millennia. He set this great snail to crawl at the head of Athens' most sacred procession. And as the realistic giant snail inched along the route, it even oozed a trail of slime along the streets. Now you might ask, why make a giant self-moving gastropod? Snails are considered slow. Is this how your vehicle works? No, probably not. This is a design from an engineer in Amsterdam who tried to figure out how that giant snail moved. But in antiquity, snails were considered slow, clumsy, lowly creatures. To drive home the insult, right behind that giant snail came a troop of asses. The grotesque spectacle was a dramatic and very public way to humiliate the demoralized, defeated citizens of Athens, once so celebrated for their quick action and intelligence. Demetrius, what happened to him? He was later expelled from Athens. All 360 of his statues to himself were smashed, and it was reported that he died of a venomous snake bite. Meanwhile, in Sparta, in 207 BC, the ruthless dictator Nabis seized power. The reign of Nabis and his wife, Apega, was long remembered for extortion, torture, and executions of masses of their subjects. Apega was said to far surpass her husband in cruelty and murder. And maybe that's why Nabis decided to fabricate or commission a mechanical facsimile of Apega, a machine that resembled the queen with extraordinary fidelity. The robotic replica wore Apega's finery and probably had a lifelike wax or maybe a plaster cast painted of Apega's own face. Someone on YouTube, some engineers have actually recreated this terrible device. Nabis would summon a citizen of Sparta, ply them with wine to get them drunk, and then demand their money and their property. And if they refused, he would say, "Perhaps my queen Apega will be more persuasive." The man was then taken to meet the fake Apega. And when he reached out and touched or took her hand, the robot stood up, triggering springs to raise her arms, which suddenly grabbed the victim. And under her fancy clothing, the body was studded with iron spikes. Levers and ratchets tightened Apega's deadly embrace, drawing the victim closer and driving the spikes deeper. And with this impaling device in the form of his wife, historians wrote that Nabis destroyed many men in Sparta.
Wow.
After 17 years, the tyrant Nabis was finally assassinated. Can't help noticing they all come to a bad end, these tyrants. So there's some good news here. It's often said that robots fulfill three functions: labor, sex, and spectacle or entertainment. The ancient Greeks had those covered. But the examples of automatons in myth and history also suggest that maybe we should add power as another function. The drive to dominate and exert power led tyrants of myth and historical times to seek and commission nefarious technology. And now, at this point, you might be wondering if I cherry-picked examples of the Greek rulers using automatons for harm or the myths. And if you ask me later in the Q&A, as far as I know, there are 2 exceptions. One from myth and one from historical times. As we saw, some of the historical automatons for inflicting harm do seem to somehow replicate or echo elements from the automatons of myth. And I'm thinking of those fiery bronze bulls and the bronze robots, Talos's burning embrace, kind of a perversion of human warmth. We can't really prove which way the causal arrow goes. Can't prove that the myths inspired the tyrants or their engineers, but it is a question that comes to mind. It has been suggested that the spiked animated figure of a Pega in Sparta might have inspired the notorious medieval torture device that I'm sure you're all thinking of, the Iron Maiden. I believe that the Iron Maiden was never actually made or used, but the idea may well have come from a Pega. And we do know that the myth of Talos, the automated bronze guardian of King Minos, that did inspire ideas of robotic, merciless iron knights in the Middle Ages. And here's Leonardo da Vinci's model. In fact, military engineers continue to be fascinated with the bronze guardian robot right up to the present day. It's also interesting, just as a side note, that security companies sometimes call themselves Talos. I think Cisco's security division is called Talos. So they also know the myth. In the 1950s, the first surface-to-air naval missiles were named Talos rockets, consciously after the myth. And there's cruel irony in the name of the latest military drones made by Elbit Systems to rain death in the Middle East. They're named Hermes, after the sly messenger, the trickster messenger of the sadistic god Zeus, who did deliver Pandora to wreak destruction on mortals. And as we speak, Pentagon scientists working with Special Ops Command and DARPA are developing a futuristic weaponized and AI-enhanced exoskeleton armor for soldiers, and they're actively soliciting designs and ideas from tech inventors. And guess what they named the suit? TALOS, so that they could have the acronym Talos. Well, in the myths, the tyrant god Zeus simply commanded Hephaestus to make machines that he used against humanity. In the historical instances, genius craftsmen offered their work to powerful kings for rewards, and other autocrats held contests, much like DARPA does today. And we know that scientists today are designing AI and robotic technologies for powerful corporations, the military, and for totalitarian states. They present many of those innovations to the public as only beneficial, such as just examples from the media: lip reading AI, GPS location services, facial recognition, biometric surveillance, smart lampposts like in Hong Kong, super soldiers, driverless vehicles, and drones. But I know everyone here can imagine darker purposes. Well, to conclude, it might seem ironic or strange here at the Long Now that I'm asking you to time travel back more than 2,700 years, but now we do know that tech and tyranny have been linked for millennia. Which way does the causal arrow go? That's debatable. People have talked about that, but I think at this point it seems like the link itself might be the more pressing question. AI is advancing at warp speed. It's outstripping our ability to work out the ethical issues, and that unknowable black box problem of AI seems to loom. like Pandora's fateful sealed jar. If there is a message from antiquity, it seems to be, will we be like short-sighted Epimetheus, who was dazzled by Pandora, or can we be more like Prometheus, using our imagination and foresight to avoid turning over the future to tyranny in any form? Thank you.
Hey everyone.
Oh, come on, what's going on with it?
Hi there. We just met a couple of weeks ago, so it's really it was really well timed. Wonderful presentation.
Yeah, thank you.
I had just one thought. I don't know if I suspect there's other people out here staying with the Pandora images that I never knew that Pandora was an invented, crafted creature. And I'm kind of interested in why I didn't know that. Yes. And whether there's an interesting story to be told about how that figure changed since the fact that she was invented and the whole thing was planned from the get-go and it wasn't her fault. Seems like a significant shift from the story that I knew.
And many people have pointed out that it reminds them of Eve, of course. I don't personally know how the story evolved from antiquity through the Middle Ages to this fairy tale European version that we know, but there is a book by Panofsky called The Evolution of the Myth of Pandora. So someone has worked on that problem. But one thing about the myth of Pandora that really interests me is the last thing that's in her jar. Oh, and it was a jar, a sealed jar in antiquity, and a mistranslation in the Renaissance made it into a box. Someone mistranslated it into a box, so we think of her with a box. But all the artists show Pandora reeling back in horror at the swarm of evils coming out there because she was such an innocent girl with a tragic case of curiosity, but that's not the story at all. And the last thing in the box was supposed to be hope. And all the fairy tale images show hope as a little fairy who's bringing comfort to humankind because of all this disaster that has been unleashed upon them. That's not in the original story either. In antiquity, hope was not a good thing. Blind hope was, philosophers and playwrights have debated since antiquity, was hope the worst or the best thing in Pandora's box? And there are even some ancient artists that show Pandora personified as a young woman popping up out of Pandora's jar, and she's got a crooked, sly smile on her face, like she's mocking you for believing that hope is going to help you.
It's that ambiguity seems to get to the heart of the whole problem. I mean, tonight you just talked about Greek examples. In the book, you also talk about examples from the East and from other cultures. So this is not the only place that we find this anticipation of automata, either in myth or in actual technologies. But there does seem to be something specific about the evolution of made things in Greece that involves something you touched on briefly, which is the power of similitude. You know, that this is a moment, if you look at earlier Attic forms of statues, or if you look at Egyptian statues, there's an obvious distance between that and verisimilitude of the human body. And we really see that in art history, and it does seem to be different. So my question is I'm wondering if you could connect that to an issue that you do talk about also in your book that I think we can all sort of enjoy today, which is the uncanny valley.
Absolutely.
So it seems like the Greeks sort of discovered the uncanny valley in objects in a way maybe that was sort of original to their artistic exploration.
Absolutely. As I was reading descriptions in Homer, in both the Iliad and the Odyssey, of people encountering very realistic animated statues, living statues, they called them, I realized that although we think of the uncanny valley as totally modern, it was invented in, I think, 1970 by Masahiro Mori, I think it is, the robotics engineer. And what's interesting is he invented it when he was looking at prosthetics, apparently, is what made him get that uncanny valley feeling, and he identified it then and extrapolated it to robots. But Homer describes Odysseus and various other characters encountering hyper-realistic paintings that seem to move and have sound, almost described like movies. And they feel a very disturbed, mixed ambivalence of
Okay, I think she's pretty much done, but I've still got another 20 minutes before the 3 hours is up, so I just loaded this. The Red Horse of the Apocalypse, 5 Lies About Ukraine and Russia. Steve Ciccolani.
It's due time that we give you an update on
Okay, Diane,
the Ukraine
cool.
situation.
Thank you.
That was like the biggest thing this year, and then it's dropped out of the news a bit. And the leader of Ukraine, Zelensky, is going to be the keynote speaker at a defense department event, and obviously he's going to ask for more billions of dollars. That's your billion and American billion and European billions, and billions of dollars are going over to this what was considered the most corrupt country in Europe and the poorest country in Europe. So I want to give you an update called The Lies, we are told. Satan primarily manifests himself through what? It's going to surprise you. My answer, I'm going to give it to you, is politicians. Why do I say that? No one else is more capable of mass evil, like mass murder, genocide, war. No one else can start wars and print money. That means that no one else can murder legally and steal legally. No one else can put their opponents in jail. If you don't like your business competition, you don't get to incarcerate them. The politicians can. So the Antichrist will, to no surprise, be a politician. That is why the separation of church and state is not really a biblical value, because the Bible clearly tells us that we are to be involved in salting our society. That has to include politics. And the Bible tells us that the worst opponent of Christianity, who's nearly here, is going to be a political leader. How do we know that? Let me give you a couple of scriptures. Daniel chapter 7, verse 25. Here's a scripture about the Antichrist. He shall speak words against the Most High, and he shall wear out the saints of the Most High. And he shall think to change the times and the law. Who can change the holidays? Let's say the times are the holidays. Who can declare holidays? Is it the church? Is it business people? No, you know who they are. And who can change laws? You know who they are. And they shall be given into his hand for a time, times, and half a time. That's a biblical way of saying 3.5 years. Actually pretty short. He's a loudmouth. He's a politician. He wants to go around changing everything like George Soros does, like Klaus Schwab does, but both of them are too old. It's going to be someone else after them. But they only get to try this for 3.5 years, and God will say, you don't get to win. You're not going to win. Your plan is not going to succeed. My plan supersedes your plan. We have been told to love Ukraine and hate Russia. Well, I'm sorry, I don't hate anybody. I love everybody who's willing to repent and accept the message of the gospel of Jesus Christ. But we're told for months and months to sympathize with Zelensky, who is a crack-smoking comedian. And we're told to demonize Vladimir Putin because he's a former KGB agent. And that's been the narrative. Whose side will you be on? Whose side? On the Ukrainian side, here are her supporters. George Soros. There's an evil guy. Klaus Schwab. There's another megalomaniac. Justin Trudeau, the most incompetent leader in the Western world. Hillary Clinton. The family that leaves a trail of dead people. If you oppose them, you meet with accidents and plane crashes. This has been documented. I'm not here to prove or disprove it. It's just been, there's a lot of evidence.
Get alerts that match your search so you can hear about properties sooner.
Joe Biden, who's raised another drug-addicted, porn-addicted son. King Charles. King Charles supports the Ukraine. The World Economic Forum supports the Ukraine. All the Hollywood elites support the Ukraine. Which side are you going to be on? Russia? I'm not saying that they have many supporters. They don't. They have China on the one side, on their side. Maybe they got Iran. Not a lot of friends. So I told you from the start, I told you at the very beginning of the war, when Christians were changing their social media profiles, pastors were praying for Ukraine and not praying for Russia, taking sides just according to the media, the narrative that we're told by the politicians. I said, don't be so fast to change your social media colors to yellow and blue. And now the lies are absolutely clear. The things that I preached and prophesied, I can say they have now been vindicated. Here are 5 lies. Number 1, that Russia is losing the war because it didn't capture Kiev in the first week.
Only wants Kiev.
This is an American military doctrine, which is to use overwhelming force on countries incapable of defending themselves. This American doctrine has failed and has not won a war in our lifetime. It just doesn't work anymore. It's failed in Afghanistan, it's failed in Iraq, and it will fail with Russia. You cannot just use sudden overwhelming force from the sky and think you will win a war. Lie number 3, Putin is a war criminal. Again, Jay Rogers, I will quote, says, the problem with this claim is that in order to prove war crimes, the actions have to fit certain definitions. If Putin or his generals indiscriminately fired missiles at civilian populations, then yes, these are war crimes. However, NATO's wars in the Middle East prove that, meaning they've actually done that, indiscriminate bombing, and they have actually killed 200,000 civilians. So by that standard, NATO and America would be war criminals. Ukraine was hiding portable military targets within the largest city's civilian populations. We also knew that the Azov battalion and the extremist nationalist militias were using civilians as human shields in converted hospitals and schools. Using civilians as human shields is an actual war crime. So if you go down that path, guess what is provably a war crime? It's what the Ukrainians have been doing. And it'd be very hard to prove in a court of law that Russia was doing it. And it'd also be very easy to prove that America and NATO have been doing it. Lie number 4. They said that Putin was this madman, that he will stop at nothing to conquer first Ukraine, and then he will not stop. He will continue at all costs, including biological weapons, nuclear weapons, to conquer all of Europe. And we see no such action at all. In fact, I think they want to prod him to do that. I think that America now has so much at stake in the Ukraine that it would be such an embarrassment to lose Ukraine that Biden won't allow it. That's why you see this rhetoric where they just won't make peace. I think they are actually pushing for a World War III. And they want to corner the bear until he does something that they will blame him for. But actually, prior to the Ukraine military operation, if you want to know what Putin is up to, what is his goal, Putin gave a speech in which he insisted 3 times that the goal was not to occupy Ukraine, but to do the following. Here they are. 1, demilitarize the country of Ukraine. 2, denazify the Ukrainian nationalist militias. There are Nazis in Ukraine. You can see videos of it. Look it up. 3, obtain a guarantee of neutral status that Ukraine would never join NATO. That's what he asked for. Right? America would not accept a Chinese military base in Canada or in Mexico or in the Caribbean. So why would Russia accept US, which NATO is really, US, military missiles and bombs and planes and tanks right at its border? And number 4, it wants that the world recognize Crimea, Lugansk, and Donetsk as territories separate from Ukraine because they're full of Russian speakers. They're full of ethnic Russians. So there is some historical claim there that we don't know all the intricacies and nuances of that. We act like, we're pro-Ukrainian and we don't even know what's happened there. Now, all these demands could have been met without war and the death of thousands of troops and civilians. But now Western NATO leaders are talking tough publicly. But know that the defeat of the Ukrainian army is a foregone conclusion, and that the sanctions on Russia might hurt the West as much or worse. Worse than that. Since 2004, Western leaders have worked to keep Ukraine impoverished and corrupt as a way to cultivate a puppet state that would act as a wedge to destabilize Russian security, even while some Western politicians have been personally enriched by corrupt business dealings in Russia and Ukraine. And that goes straight to the Biden family. That's what Donald Trump was trying to investigate. He was impeached for making a call about getting facts on how deep was the corruption, how deep was the deep state, how many people were making millions of dollars in Ukraine. And the Biden family were involved. It's not even a secret. A peace deal was possible. Putin had said what he wanted. We could have negotiated. Did you know that 1 month after the invasion, Russia and Ukraine were ready to sign a peace deal in April 2022? But Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister of UK, personally traveled to Ukraine to meet Zelensky and stop a peace deal. This has now come out. The war would have been over 2 months after it started. Europe would not be short of energy, food, or fertilizer, and the world price of oil and gas would not have skyrocketed. None of your
Big, small, shop it all interest free with a Latitude Gem Visa credit card with 6 months interest free on everyday.
None of your bills would have gone up if Boris Johnson had not personally met with Zelensky. And here's what went down. According to multiple former senior U.S. officials, in April 2022, Russia and Ukraine negotiators appeared to have tentatively agreed on the outlines of a negotiated interim settlement. Russia would withdraw to its position on February 23, when it controlled part of Donbass region and all of Crimea, and in exchange, Ukraine would promise not to seek NATO membership and instead receive security guarantees from a number of countries. Reasonable? Is Putin the war criminal or Boris Johnson? Putin was ready to sign this peace deal. You would have averted the deaths. You would have averted the energy crisis. We don't even know how many lies, how deep the lies go. Only when these things begin to come out And how many people report this? Is this on CNN? Is this on BBC? It's such a controlled narrative. According to a Western newspaper, a pro-Western newspaper in Ukraine, it said that even if, Boris Johnson said, even if Ukraine is ready to sign some agreement on guarantees with Putin, they are not. Western powers are not. Johnson's position was that the collective West now felt that Putin was not really as powerful as they had previously imagined, and that here was a chance to press him. So they were going for war. They were trying to destroy a part of Europe. You cannot have European security without including Russia. Russia is a part of Europe. But they're alienating Russia. Sounds like a bad marriage. They seem to have this formula down pat. The entire world sanctioned Russian oil, froze Russian assets, attacked the Russian ruble, forbade Russian stocks to trade. Netflix even canceled paid subscriptions. Can you imagine that? On what basis? You're a Russian, you didn't start any war, you paid for your Netflix, you can't access it anymore. Russian news was wiped off the internet. There used to be RT, you used to hear both sides. They demonized Russia and completely stopped any flow of information from the other side. We're still living in this, and you think we have free press, free speech? They're tightening the noose. One day they will say, I cannot preach the word of God. And I will preach. I will preach to my dying day.
Amen.
I would rather die and go to heaven than preach your lies and go to hell.
Okay, guys, I'm out. Thanks for joining.